Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I was sitting in a bar having a quiet time drinking my usual scotch and water when I watched her walk up to the jukebox and put a quarter in. To me, she was still the most beautiful girl in the world and had been since I had first met her. I knew she knew I was there. She had come to give me a reminder once again of where we were in our relationship. I knew we were in limbo because I could not decide how to resolve it all. It took about 30 seconds for the record to start to play. Love hurts, love scars, love wounds and marks blasted through the speakers. The words of that song took me back to the day I had realized it all had begun. It had reached the point that I had put together a great scheme by one to take me down and destroy my marriage. She had almost succeeded. All it had taken was determination, focus, and attention to the details along with the time for the power of persuasion to work. It didn't hurt that she had the power and influence. The problem for me was I did not know how I could get that person's ongoing conduct to end. Once she failed, I knew she would try again. The angle of how it had been done had been so masterfully applied that no one would believe the person behind it had almost achieved it. I even knew the reason my problem now was coming to a head. The question I had to decide was how I was going to deal with it. The problem started years ago on the day that Jody and I got married. Jody's first two names are Jo and Mandy. Her parents started calling her Jody long before she started grade school. I met her at a mutual friend's birthday party a year after I started teaching high school. I wasn't looking for love or a relationship and had stepped in to break up an argument between her and her date. I got them parted and had escorted him off the property by suggesting he go home and come down from whatever he was high on. As I watched him drive off, I called the local police station and warned them that he was driving under the influence of something. I have even given them the make, model, and plate numbers. When they pulled him over with his anger still raging, he had decided to swing at the police officers. That was his first mistake. That allowed them to search the vehicle and they found enough drugs to charge him with possession with the intention to sell. What I didn't know, he used Jody's brother's name to try to defuse his situation. Since Jody had come with him, I offered to give her a ride home when the events started to wind down. She asked about my date, and I said I had come alone. That perked her interest and I explained that I was too busy paying down educational debts and couldn't afford one. She laughed and said get serious, then accepted the ride home. Her older brother, a police detective, had heard about the bust and was waiting at his parents' place for Jody to get home because he was concerned about her well-being. I didn't know when I first met him that he was one. The jukebox belted out Any Heart, not tough or strong enough to take a lot of pain. Jody was playing it deliberately to try to get me past the pain that I was dealing with, like those unexplained nights and the lies that went with them. Little did she realize she was making me relive it all again. My mind went back to the night we met. Like all overprotective big brothers, he had to check me out after I had safely brought her home. It was he that gave Jody my phone number and told her that I was coaching a basketball game at the high school that Friday night. Jody came to the game with her parents only to watch our team get beat badly because two of our best players were carrying out their anger to each other over one of the school cheerleaders that the two of them were chasing. Team spirit went out the window during the first half, and we were down so far, we couldn't recover. During the second half, we outplayed them and doubled their scores, but it was still not enough. The two players involved in the dispute had been benched for the second half. Before they went home that night, everyone knew they were out for the season. We went to the divisional championships that season. Jody's father said that I had been given no choice and agreed with my decision. The two players had allowed their dispute between the two of them to destroy the unity of the team. The next day, Jody and I met for lunch, and that began our relationship. She had wanted to thank me for how I handled the situation with her former boyfriend. Jody's personality to me was addicting, for she seemed to find humor in everything. 8 months later, I asked her father for his daughter's hand, and he gladly gave me his blessing. The jukebox boomed. Takes a lot of pain, love is like a cloud, holds a lot of rain, love hurts. No truer words could have been spoken to me because in the solitude of my mind, that's where it sat. Each day at school, I saw the smiling faces of young couples in love, and it reminded me of innocence that Jody and I once had. Slowly, I had begun to figure it out. Pat Robertson's son and I were about the same age. Pat, a female in her 40s at the time, worked beside my wife on the second floor at the Blue Cross Data Processing Center in our small town. 5 days a week, 52 times a year for 10 years. Routinely, the 4-floor office complex processed medical insurance claims daily. Each one had to be reviewed and gone thoroughly completely to save as much money as possible. It was surprising how much was refused by a simple thing such as improper coding. Blue Cross was able to cut its responsibility for claims by 10% on that alone. Pat Roberson, my wife's supervisor, met me for the first time on the day of Jody's and my wedding. By that time, she had worked with my wife for 3 years. I knew as soon as I met her by the way she looked at me that she did not like me. It would take time for me to find out the reason. I learned from staff socials over the next few years the reason behind her personal feelings. As I watched Jody and her father walk towards me, I thought I was the richest man in the world. She looked like she was the most beautiful girl in the world. With her blonde hair styled to perfection, the white full-length gown hugging her frame, and a smile that lit up the whole room. From the moment of our return from our honeymoon, Pat Robertson began to hunt for a reason and a way to degrade me or my views in my wife Jody's eyes. Over the course of the last few years of our marriage, she had caused a lot of minor problems for us until both of us found out why she was doing that. That's when my wife began to learn to just block her out whenever she mentioned my name. Pat had one big problem according to all I had talked to. She believed that my wife had married the wrong man. The man she should have married was her son. Matt was a computer nerd who ran his own business and was quietly successful. His biggest problem was he was socially inept. His only problem that because of his upbringing he was socially backward and hadn't dated anyone in years. Most who had gone to school with him had said they had never met a more boring person in their lives than him. Pat felt it was her responsibility as a mother to find him the perfect wife. To her, Jody was it. The lead singer of Nazareth sang, "Love hurts, love hurts. Boy does it ever," especially when the pain is caused by others outside of the lover's control. It became more a problem for Pat Robertson when Jody gave birth to our first daughter. That little ray of sunshine should have been her son Matt's and Jody's, not Jody's and mine. Then 2 years later our second child, also a girl, came into the world, which made Pat's problem worse. Jody and I had 2 kids that should have been Matt's and Jody's instead of Jody's and mine. What I did not know was that was the day that Pat decided she had to destroy our marriage if Jody was going to be able to give her the grandchildren she wanted. Pat was a woman who did not give up or back down. When she wanted something, she achieved it regardless of the consequences. During her short walk in life, she had already proved that her greatest mastery was in destroying marriages. She had done it 3 times. Taking the man she had trapped into marriage down each time, making herself richer because of it, while leaving the man she had dominated broke and beaten. That was why most of those who knew her son believed that he was afraid of women. Yes, to most who knew her background, she was one scary woman. She was aided in her plan by the Human Resources Department that promoted her to the Assistant Administration Manager and allowed her to promote who she wanted to her former position as a sectional supervisor. This gave Pat Robertson access to every security code the data center had in its system. That was when her long-term scheming turned into action. Of course, she picked my wife to step into her shoes. As a result, a pattern was established by her. She started to send with Human Resources approval Jody on every training session for management as possible and got her taking courses online to improve her qualifications in the new field. By doing that, Pat thought it would speed up the breakup of our marriage because of the time it would take away from she called family responsibilities. Jody, thrilled with the chance of further advancement and self-improvement, ate the attention up. That only aggravated Pat even more because I was too supportive of my wife and her new opportunity. Pat had expected that in her eyes I would not have supported her. What Pat failed to understand that as a high school teacher I encouraged everyone to follow their dreams in the educational fields. One of the new in-house programs Pat set up over time was the Thursday night meeting with all sectional supervisors. Since the data center for the Blue Cross was primarily filled with women, it left quite of their husbands totally pissed off. With 4 section leaders on each floor, there were 16 females who had their lives routines changed overnight. The song went on saying, "I'm young, I know, but even so I know a thing or two." That's what the problem was. What I learned before the truth came out was really an eye-opener. Slowly, one by one, the husbands found the name of another one of these husbands who were having their marital lives indirectly affected by the new policy that Pat brought in. We all personally believe that if Pat had of being honest about who and what she was all about, she would have come out and admitted that she was a butch dyke. Between us all, we formed an informal social group. All of us believed that we had to find some way to force the corporation to cut the mid-management staff some slack. It was on a Thursday night when one of the Thursday night wifeless fathers stopped off at my place, asking me to watch his kids. He had reached the point where he was tired of the bullshit and wanted to find out what was so important about these Thursday night meetings. He drove over to the Blue Cross data center to discover there were no cars in the parking lot. After banging on the doors for a few, he attracted security, who came on prepared to take him into custody because of his agitated state. Once he explained why he was so upset, that was when the conversation began to get serious. There was no Thursday night management meeting and never had been. When he accused them of lying, they produced for him in minutes the electronic sign-out times on the time cards for his wife on Thursday nights for the whole time period and gave it to him. He was smart. He had recorded the conversation on his cell phone. By the time the ladies were due to be home from their usual Thursday night staff meeting, every husband had been forwarded via cell phones a copy so they could discover for themselves that for the last 16 months their wives had been lying about what was going on. Over the course of the evening, through multiple phone calls, we all decided as a group to keep quiet for now. That's when I decided I needed some guidance. The song continued, "I learned from you. I really learned a lot, really learned a lot." It came to me in the middle of the night that whatever was going on was Pat Robertson's latest attempt to drive a wedge between Jody's and my relationship. There were 2 things I did not know. Was Jody a willing participant in it? And was she actually involved with Pat's son Matt? With all that was going on, the next Saturday morning, I met Jody's older brother Bob for coffee. He also knew about Jody's Thursday night meetings. Hell, everybody did. It had cost her attendance as some of her side of the family's special events. Bob had just written it off as it being part of the employment situation his little sister was in. I told Bob of all the problems his sister and I had been going through because of Pat Robertson's ongoing attempts to destroy our marriage. I purposely did not tell him the reason why. Bob felt he could not look into it. That was until I let him listen to the conversation that had been recorded. If you have never seen a police detective listen to a conversation that definitely implies that a scam is being pulled that may or may not be legal, you should. It gives one an interesting lesson on how they respond to things. How many husbands are caught up by this? Bob asked. 16 of us, I respond. It's been going on for about 16 months. I found out because I looked after another husband's kids when he wanted to check things out last Thursday night. It's his voice that you hear on the audio clip. Damn it, Arlie, he said. Don't do anything stupid. We have 16 females whose time is unaccounted for plus their boss for about 6 hours a week every Thursday night. This has structure, routine, secrecy, and organization to it. Whatever is going on has been deliberately kept from all of you. The way it's been done implies that whatever is going on may not be legal, he explained. Just the fact that what is going on is being covered up is forcing the department to look further into it. Contact those you know. Explain to them that they're not to say anything or do anything to upset the apple cart while this is under investigation. Bob, do you think it's that serious? I had to ask. Don't know yet. It's too early to tell, he said. But their conduct is suspicious enough for us to investigate to find out what they all have been doing during that time. Send me the file that contains that conversation, as there are others who will need to hear it. My gut is telling me your friend stumbled into something big. I took my cell phone and talked to the person I had babysat for Thursday night, letting him know what the police detective wanted us to do. I will pass the word, he said, because no one has said anything because they thought we should all figure it out together before going forth. I asked him to gather a list of all the ladies' names who were part of those who were unaccountable for Thursday nights and email to Detective Robert Parson as soon as possible. I had to talk to Bob again, so we captured a private moment at a family function a few weeks later. He told me it was being investigated on this end by his department in cooperation with the FBI Computer Fraud Division. He made it clear until it was finished, he couldn't reveal anything. If Jody is involved, she will be treated like all the others. At that point, I knew that what we had accidentally stumbled upon was serious. The jukebox boomed. Love is like a flame, it burns you when it's hot. Love hurts, love hurts. Those words brought tears to my eyes because it reminded me of what happened next. It had been 18 weeks since I had talked to my brother-in-law Bob about the situation. I was headed over to my mother-in-law's to pick up my daughters because I was running late because of one of the problem students' parents. Jody's mother was a saint in my eyes. Since the time Jody had returned to work after maternity leave with the birth of our first, Sharon had stepped up and babysat our daughter. There was no way she was going to allow anyone but her to look after her. We paid her $1,000 a month now because she took care of two. It was my own fault I ran a yellow light. A truck sitting at the intersection jumped the red light and broadside me on the driver's side. I was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the hospital. As they loaded me up, I asked the officer to call Robert and get him to explain to his mom why I would not be picking up my daughters. The last thing on my mind was the fact that this was a Thursday. Robert, when he heard, called first his sister on her cell phone and found that his call went to the answering service. After calling his mom, he headed over to Pat Roberson's with a team of police officers. It had been learned that Pat was operating a skim program on the data system in the office she worked in, and once a week the 16 ladies underneath her had to work Thursday evening, helping her shave a few dollars off what the hospitals would be paid in their billings. The basement of her home had been turned into a small computer center set up with the help of her son, who had been able to bypass all the security that Blue Cross had installed thanks to the code she had provided. The hospitals she was scamming were all on the East Coast. On each individual bill, they submitted they lost $1 or $2. All it took was adding a processing fee against part of the claim, which would end up being paid by the end user. Over the course of 16 months, with the number of bills submitted, it had added up to a very large sum. Blue Cross Audit Department hadn't caught it until the FBI had come into the corporate office. Pat Robertson had added a processing fee against these hospitals and had that amount transferred daily to a separate account. Once a month, the computer would automatically transfer the built-up amount to an offshore account. The problem was in the raid was that my wife was not with them. He asked Pat Roberson where my wife was. Robert learned by questioning others that Jody was with Matt and had been teaching him social skills every Thursday night for over a year. Once Bob had found out, Pat Robertson made it clear that Jody had refused from day one to work overtime. Pat believed that Jody felt something else was going on and had refused to go along. All the employees actually thought they were doing regular work. Pat had used a special performance raise to cover the extra hours the ladies were putting in. So, all thought they were being paid for the additional hours. This new processing fee, they believed, was just a charge the corporation was trying on a trial basis to see if it would be accepted or challenged, until they decided if they were going to take it nationwide. These were being done quietly, as not to draw the general medical field's attention. Jody had refused to take part, but in order to keep her job had been forced to agree to secrecy and to teach Matt how to become a normal adult who would be able to fit into society's social norms. Tonight, They had gone out for dinner as a couple to the private golf club that Matt was a member of. Robert left the team to do the cleanup and drove with another officer over to the private club in Jackson to arrest Matt and inform his little sister that I was in the hospital. They were not in the restaurant or in the lounge. They were located in a private area square dancing to some programmed music. "Robert, what are you doing here?" Jody asked her brother. "I'm here to arrest your lover," he said. "He's joining his mother and 16 of your coworkers in jail for fraud, theft, and a few other charges." "He's not my lover. He's just my boss's son," Jody replied. "I can prove I'm being paid for my time." "Look, Jody, you just said you're being paid for the services you provide," he said. "Most hookers are. Meanwhile, your husband is lying in the hospital not knowing where you are, with the knowledge that for 16 months you have been lying about what you have been doing on your Thursday nights. Then you tell me it was just so you could sell yourself." Robert turned to the officer and said, "Officer, have you recorded this on your cam?" The officer acknowledged that he did. "Then arrest my sister on the charge of prostitution. We will leave it up to the district attorney to decide if she can be charged," Robert said with authority, knowing that the charges would not stick, because for one they had not been caught in the act of transferring money from him to her. The officer walked over and read Jody her rights, then placed her under arrest and cuffed her. Jody was in complete shock. They called for a female police officer to transport her to the holding cells. Although she had not lied, she realized that she had not told the whole truth. The fact that she had told Robert the barest of the facts had left him no choice. While they were waiting for the female police officer, Jody heard her brother call her mother and inform her that she had been found and was under arrest for prostitution. "Don't say anything to anyone, Mom, until I talk to you before I go to see Arlie. It's best that I explain everything to him when I see him." Robert left Jody in tears as soon as the additional female officer showed up. He and the officer he had come with took Matt to jail. "Jody has never slept with me," Matt said. "My mother was paying her to teach me what I did not know. Thanks to her, I have started to date." Jody thought that her husband would not understand. "That may be true," Robert replied. "The problem is that no one will believe it. Not with 17 people being arrested. The problem for her is that I found her with you in a private setting that no one would have thought of looking for in, and she admitted on camera that she was being paid for her services." Matt saw the whole situation for what it was. One big mess. Arlie was the only innocent one in this. Jody had agreed to help him only to get his mother off her back. His mother had been slowly wearing on her for years. He knew he had to say something about himself that he had never revealed. "It's going to be hard to convict Jody with anything," Matt said, "for the simple reason that I am gay. It's a secret that I have kept from everybody, including my mom." The first meeting with Jody, I disclosed that fact to her. "All she has been doing me is teaching me to overcome the personal quirks I had to develop as a protective measure against my mother's conduct towards me when I was growing up." Robert relayed a message for the officer transporting Jody to bring Jody back to pick up her car. She was no longer being charged. After hearing Matt's comments, he concluded he was telling the truth. After locking Matt up, he had gone over to his mother's and explained what had transpired over the course of the evening and what he had learned. "The only question we have to wait on now," Jody's mom said, "is how is Arlie going to view it? Will he accept what she says as the truth after months of lies?" "I don't know, Mom," Bob said. "I'm heading over to the hospital to inform Arlie what I've learned. If I was him, I would leave her after what she has done." Bob got to me before Jody did. He explained in detail what he had learned that evening. "The question I have to ask, Bob," I said, "is there any way to prove that what Matt claims is true? Until I can be sure that Matt is gay, how can I be sure what Jody explains to me is the truth?" Nazareth's lead singer continued, "Some fools think of happiness, blissfulness, togetherness. Some fools fool themselves. I guess they're not fooling me. It's a lonely, dark place when you have to stand alone because there is no way to prove what the truth is. That's why I was in limbo, unable to move until the court case was proceeded on. I had been fooled once. I wasn't going to have it happen to me a second time." I looked over at Jody. We both had our eyes filled with tears. She had told me she did not have an affair with Matt. I had told her that because of her ongoing lies, I had to be able to prove she didn't. It would take another month before the trails would start. Until then, we were in limbo. For now, Jody and our daughters were living with her mother. Jody had been given Pat Roberson's former position. The 16 other section supervisors had been let go because of a lack of trust, although they were not being charged. Nazareth's lead sing continued, "I know it isn't true. I know it isn't true. Love is just a lie made to make you blue. Love hurts. Love hurts." I finished my drink, got up, and walked over to her and said, "In my heart, I know it isn't true. I keep praying that the boyfriend Matt claims he has comes forth to prove both of you right because I need a reason to begin to be able to trust again." Nazareth's closed the song out singing, "I know it isn't true. I know it isn't true. Love is just a lie made to make you blue. Love hurts. Love hurts. Love hurts." I left the bar with the most beautiful girl in the world crying because of the things she had said and did. Matt's boyfriend, a married man who turned out to be one of my students' parent, stopped into my regular classroom after school was out for the weekend asking if we could speak in private. It took him an hour to explain everything to me. He was also known to be a family friend of the Robertsons. Matt told me what his conduct had caused to you and your wife, the man said. I'm sorry that I did not go to see Matt sooner. When I heard that you were needing a way to verify their stories, I knew I had to come and explain it to you. Faced with what would happen if it became public knowledge, I vowed to him that I would not disclose his name to anyone. I literally ran to my car because I had a place to go as fast as possible. I stopped at the jewelry store before heading over to Jody's parents' place. I knocked on the door and her father answered. Looking at me, he said, "Why didn't just walk right in? You're always welcome here." Jody was in the kitchen helping her mother prepare dinner. She turned to me in complete surprise. I got down on one knee, pulled out the new ring, and said, "I know we're still married, but I was wondering if you would be willing to renew our vows and start over?" I looked up at the most beautiful girl in the world, and she was crying tears of joy. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
For 12 years, I dedicated myself to working in my family's business, only for my father to give it to my estranged sister and her wealthy fiancé instead of me. When they abandoned him following his heart attack, he came to me for help. I am Tessa, a 36-year-old woman, and I was pushed out of the business I had helped build, the same business my father had established just 8 months ago. For context, I've been a part of the family business for almost 12 years now. We have a jewelry business that was started by my grandfather on my father's side, and after all my dedication, I expected it would eventually come to me. After all, I am the older sister, and I've always taken a keen interest in the business ever since my teenage years. My dad, Gerald, constantly reassured me that I would eventually take over the business because my sister, Savannah, 33F, didn't seem interested in pursuing a career. She only wanted to get married and have a family. So, if there was going to be an heir to the business, it was going to be me, and that had always been taken for granted. There was no formal documentation of it, but in hindsight, I should have arranged for something like that, considering I had served as my dad's personal assistant for 12 years. I even quit my first job just 2 years after working there because I didn't want to come off as entitled and wanted to gain genuine work experience on my own before joining my father. Despite everything I'd done, I was still kicked out of the business in favor of my sister and her ridiculously rich fiancé, Landon. Savannah hadn't even been a part of the family for the past 15 years. She made some terrible decisions, and my parents cut her out of the family right after she turned 18. She had announced that she wouldn't be going to college because she wanted to explore and find herself. This didn't sit well with my parents, Gerald and Janice, and they gave her an ultimatum: either go to college or leave. Savannah, being the person she is, chose to leave and moved in with her boyfriend at the time. That relationship didn't last long, and they broke up within 6 months. She returned to our doorstep, asking to be let back into the family. Before she left, she had said some awful things to my parents, like how she didn't need them, how she was better off without a family like ours, and how they weren't good enough for her because her boyfriend's family was wealthier than us. She completely insulted and humiliated us before walking out. When she came back, my dad told her that his condition still stood: she had to go to college and get a degree, no matter the field, or she couldn't return. Savannah tried to argue her way back, but my dad stood firm. She left again, saying she'd never come back. For the next 15 years, we only saw Savannah at family events, and even then, she refused to speak to us. We learned about her life through other relatives, as she refused to keep in contact with my mom or me. Despite several attempts on our part, she cut us off simply because we were still on good terms with my father. I have to give her credit, she was stubborn and stuck to her word. Savannah didn't come back until my dad made the first move and tried to re-establish contact with her. Over time, she figured her life out, though not in the way we expected. As promised, she didn't go to college, but she moved in with a friend and started working various jobs to support herself. I think it was good for her because, over the years, she matured a lot. She switched jobs frequently, but for the past couple of years, she'd been working at an advertising agency. We knew all this because she stayed in touch with the rest of our family, and they kept us updated. About a year ago, my dad's health took a dangerous turn. He had serious heart problems, and we almost lost him. His cardiologist warned us that he needed to make drastic lifestyle changes. During that time, thinking the end was near, my dad decided to contact Savannah and end the feud between them. Savannah, having grown up considerably over the past 15 years, finally came back to the family. The day she visited us, she came alone. We didn't talk much about her life because we were too busy reminiscing about the past, and she didn't want to make it all about herself. So, she didn't tell us much about what she had been up to. The information we didn't get from our relatives was how she was doing professionally, but we didn't know anything about her personal life. Anyway, she seemed happy to be back, and we were all focused on the reconciliation between father and daughter. It was a very emotional reunion, and at the time, I was happy about it all, not knowing what was about to happen later. When she visited us for the second time, she brought along her fiancé, which came as a huge shock to all of us. She told us that she had been dating Landon, her fiancé, for the past 3 years, and they had only recently gotten engaged. No one else in the family knew about it, which is why we hadn't found out either. They had been keeping it under wraps. The flow of information wasn't just one-sided. She had also heard, thanks to our relatives, that our father was having health complications, but she didn't know how serious it was, which is why she hadn't bothered to visit sooner. She believed it wasn't appropriate to announce the engagement at that time, so she had kept it private. Now, however, she felt it was time to introduce him to the family, so she brought him along. He seemed like a nice guy, and I could tell he was well off financially. His clothes, watch, and shoes were all expensive. I was happy for my sister because it seemed like she had finally found the kind of guy she wanted, someone financially stable, who knew what he wanted in life, and had his future planned out. After talking to both of them, we learned that her fiancé, like her first boyfriend, was also the son of a wealthy man who owned a chain of fast food restaurants. But unlike her first boyfriend, this guy seemed serious about her, and it was clear they were truly in love. I was genuinely happy for her and remember congratulating them both. I never thought my father, or even my sister and her fiancé, would do what they did. But, after about 3 weeks of knowing him, my father suddenly decided it would be best to let them take over the business as well. One morning, he called me and asked me to come home because he wanted to talk about something. At the time, I was at work, as I had been the one managing everything ever since my father's health declined. I was essentially running the business, although he hadn't officially retired yet. I knew retirement was coming, and I was confident I would step up as CEO of our company. But that one day changed everything. Suddenly, my sister and her fiancé were in line to take over the business I had been managing for so long. When I arrived at my parents' house that day, my sister and her fiancé weren't there, but my parents were, and they looked grim. After some small talk, my dad finally delivered the crushing news. At first, I thought he was joking, but when I realized he was serious, I couldn't believe it. When I asked him why he would make such a decision after just 3 weeks of knowing this man, he said he had his reasons but refused to explain. After considerable arguing, he finally told me that the reason he was handing over the business to my sister and her fiancé, instead of me as promised, was because he believed they would be more capable than I am. To make matters worse, he said he thought this could be a welcome gift to them for rejoining the family, as they were about to start a new chapter by getting married in a couple of months. He believed this could be their wedding gift. I tried to convince him it was a terrible idea. No wedding gift should be as large as an entire business, just because the guy appeared wealthy. Besides, my father had always led me to believe I would inherit the business when he retired. I had built my entire life around this, and now, suddenly, he was taking it away from me to give to people who hadn't been part of our lives for the last 15 years. I tried to tell him that maybe he could make us partners in the business and attempted to bargain and negotiate with him because this was my future we were talking about. But my father was firm in his belief, saying that he was going to let them take over because he thought it would be in better hands. He believed that since my sister's fiancé's father had already built a successful business of his own, they would be able to expand our jewelry business twice as fast as I could. I begged him for just one chance, but he was not ready to listen to me, and I was heartbroken that day. I wasn't just upset because I was losing something so big, it was more about the fact that I had devoted 12 years of my life to this, only to get nothing in return. I hadn't even been able to earn my father's respect, because if he had respected the work and effort I put into the business, he wouldn't have pushed me out. That was the day I decided to cut all ties with my family because I had nothing left to say to them. I had expected my sister to at least fight for me, but she let me down as well. They gladly accepted their so-called wedding gift, which was my life's work. My sister had always known that I wanted to take over the family business once my dad retired. I had talked about it non-stop since I was 13, and I spent my whole life looking forward to it. So, it wasn't as if she didn't know that when she accepted the wedding gift, she was accepting my dreams and taking them as her own. She even made a post on social media thanking our parents for the gift and, along with it, announced her engagement. After that, no one from the family bothered to reach out to me, and I think that was the most hurtful part of all, the fact that they didn't even seem to care about me. The day I left my father's house, they stopped speaking to me, and I felt like I had been used. 12 years of my life had gone to waste. I was just thankful that I had enough savings to fall back on. For a couple of months, I could afford not to do anything and just focus on putting my life back together because I felt like everything had fallen apart. That was 8 months ago, and after that, I started therapy. I could feel myself spiraling into depression, and I knew I had to address it immediately, or I don't know what I would have done. Seeing all the posts my sister shared made me feel sick, so I had to block her. I also told my relatives that I was no longer in touch with my family and didn't want to hear anything about them. I literally requested them not to tell me anything, no matter how big it seemed, because I didn't want to know. They respected my wishes and kept everything from me. So, for the past couple of months, I had no idea that my dad's health had been steadily deteriorating, and my sister and her fiancé didn't seem to care. It wasn't until a week ago that I found out when I received a call from my dad. He told me he was in the hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest in the middle of the night and wanted me to come see him. I had blocked his number, so he had to use someone else's phone to call me. Honestly, I felt guilty about that, but then I remembered what he did to me 8 months ago, and that guilt faded. Still, once he called and told me he was suffering, I told him I would come see him right away. So, I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. When I got there, my mom, Janice, and my dad, Gerald, were present, but to my surprise, neither Savannah or Landon were anywhere to be found. I found that strange because I assumed they were close, given they were running the family business. I couldn't help myself and asked about my sister and her fiancé as soon as I walked into the hospital room. My father, with great disappointment, told me that Savannah was too busy to come see him, and so was her fiancé. I was shocked because, having run the business for 12 years, I knew it was lucrative and mostly self-sustaining. Unless there was a major crisis, we never had to be at the workplace all day. At least, that's how it was when I was in charge. I can't say how things are now. When my dad told me they were too busy, I asked if they had come to see him at all since the heart attack. He told me they hadn't. He had called them, but they only replied by text, saying they were too busy and would visit once he was discharged. These details were shocking to me, and I could see that my father realized he had made a grave mistake by handing over the reins of the business to my sister and her fiancé. So, he told me that one of the main reasons he had called me was to apologize for what he had done. He said he felt incredibly guilty and regretful for pushing me out of the business, despite all the hard work and effort I had put in. Now, he wanted to make things right and invite me back into the family and the business. He told me about my sister and her fiancé not showing up at the hospital for him, and how he had realized they didn't care about him the way he had cared about them. He also mentioned that this wasn't even the first time they had refused to show up for him. Over the past few months, they had become disconnected. He explained that after he handed over the business to them, they started visiting him less and less. Before that, they would come by every other day to check on him, but once his health began deteriorating, they didn't bother to visit, always claiming they were too busy with work. He found this hard to believe because both he and I knew that no one is so busy they can't spare an hour from their day, especially since they lived just a few blocks away from my parents' house. He never confronted them about it, but now they had crossed a line, and my dad couldn't tolerate the disrespect anymore. He wanted to take back the company and give it to the person who truly deserved it. We discussed everything in the hospital room, and then he invited me to rejoin the business. I was overjoyed. He apologized for everything, and though I'm still not completely over it, I forgave him at that moment because, for me, nothing was more important than reclaiming what I deserved. And if that meant forgiving my father, I was willing to do it. The problem now is that he's had this conversation with my sister as well, telling her that he wants her to step away. He's finally realized that even though he has always cared for her, she has never been there for him, and he won't tolerate this level of disrespect any longer. He asked for the company back and was giving it to the person who deserved it, leaving them to figure things out on their own. Unsurprisingly, my sister is upset, and for some reason, she thinks I'm the one to blame. She called me this morning and really lashed out, accusing me of being a horrible person and saying she can't believe I would do something so cruel. I don't even understand why she's acting like this. I feel like there's something we don't know, but she's behaving as if she's lost everything, and it's all because of me. The truth is, I think it's her own fault for not visiting our dad in the hospital. I mean, a cardiac arrest is a serious issue, and she could have taken time off work to see him. She was the one being selfish, and now I'm getting what I deserved from the start. 8 months ago, she had no problem accepting a gift she knew she didn't deserve, so why should I feel guilty about claiming something that rightfully belongs to me? Anyway, she's really upset, and when I tried to console her, she hung up on me in the middle of my sentence. Now, I'm left wondering if I'm the bad guy because, every time something happens, I seem to take the fall for it. Honestly, I'm tired of this. Am I the a-hole for letting my father ask my sister and her fiancé to step out of the family business so I can take over? Update 1, thank you all so much for the responses to my post. I kind of knew I didn't deserve the backlash from my sister, but hearing it from all of you has reassured me even more. If even strangers, who know nothing about our lives, believe I deserve the business, then I have nothing more to say in my defense, nor do I think I need to. It's been a couple of days since my last conversation with my sister, and I haven't heard back from her yet. She hasn't blocked me, so that's a good sign, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more going on here than she's letting on. I don't think someone with a rich fiancé would be so upset about losing out on our business. I have a theory that maybe things aren't what they seem with her fiancé. Some of you had asked about this in the comments section of the original post, but I didn't mention it at the time because I didn't think it was relevant. However, now I believe it's important to address. I don't think my sister's fiancé and his family are doing well financially right now. From what I've heard, his dad's company has been facing loss after loss, and they haven't been able to recover for over a year. I suspect that sneaking into our family business was their way of securing a safety net, eventually hoping to take over. I still haven't figured out why exactly my sister reacted the way she did when she learned I was being asked to rejoin the family business while she was being asked to step aside. If her fiancé's family was as wealthy as she claimed, she shouldn't have been so devastated. Something just didn't add up, and I have a feeling she's going to come clean about it soon. Anyway, we're lucky that my father didn't sign any documents or officially hand over the business to my sister and her fiancé. If he had, we would have been in serious trouble. He's still the CEO, and they were only working under him in the role I used to have. He was training them to take over eventually, but now it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. I spoke to my father, and while he mentioned that my sister is very upset, he told me he can't afford to focus on that right now. His priority is to sign everything over to me so that I can take control of the business. He's already speaking with a lawyer to get the paperwork drawn up, and I'll be taking over as soon as possible, making it formal and official. Honestly, I'm really excited, and nothing, even my sister's dramatic outbursts, can dampen my mood right now. Update 2*Hi. It's been a couple of weeks since my last post, and I just wanted to let you all know that I am now officially the new CEO of my dad's jewelry business. The handover is complete, and I'm in charge. It feels amazing to finally say that. I always knew this day would come, but there were a few delays in the process because of my sister. Speaking of her, she's absolutely not happy about any of this, and I guess I can finally confirm my suspicions. My theory was right. She and her fiancé were trying to sneak their way into our family business and take over so they'd have something to fall back on when her fiancé's father inevitably let go of his company. It turns out, it was my sister who planted the idea of welcoming them back into the family by handing over the business to her fiancé in my father's mind, and unfortunately, my father fell for it. I learned all of this recently after reconnecting with my father. He admitted that he wasn't thinking straight at the time. He was swayed by the idea that someone from such an established business family would be better suited to manage everything than I was. His original plan had been to keep me in the same position I'd been working in, but when I told him I wasn't interested unless I could be the head of the company, he lost his temper. That led to these 8 months of misery for both of us. Thankfully, he came to his senses just in time, and we avoided a huge disaster because, as of now, my sister's fiancé and his father have zero credibility in the market. I had been hearing rumors about my sister's fiancé's father's business being on the verge of shutting down, but I didn't believe them because I figured my dad would reach out to me if something like that were happening. At the same time, my father assumed I would reach out to him if I had heard anything, so neither of us did, which, in hindsight, was pretty foolish. Anyway, my sister finally confessed what she was trying to do and set her ego aside to speak to me. She reached out a couple of days ago, just before it was finalized that I would become the CEO, and admitted that she and her fiancé desperately needed jobs. They aren't sure how much longer her fiancé's father's company can survive. Now she's asking me for help, and I told her I'd think about it. I don't have an issue with hiring them. It's just that I'll never be able to fully trust them again because I know what their original intentions were. That's what feels so strange to me right now. I do want to help my sister, but at the same time, how can I hire people I don't trust? Anyway, I told her I needed some time to think it over, and she has agreed to wait for now, but honestly, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Update 3*. So, I've decided not to hire my sister and her fiancé. I know some people may think this makes me seem selfish, but the truth is, I can't trust them. When my dad offered them the chance to take over the company initially, they accepted it without hesitation, and they didn't bother to reach out to me for 8 months. They showed absolutely no compassion or empathy for anyone other than themselves, and I don't want people like that around me or working for me. So, with a heavy heart, I told my sister that I couldn't help her. Unsurprisingly, she didn't take the news well. She showed up at my office the other day and threw a tantrum, accusing me of being heartless and selfish. She even told me that she regretted ever letting me have the company back. I found that odd because she had no part in that decision. It was entirely my father's choice. When she took over, it wasn't my decision, and now that I'm in charge, it's not hers either. For her to act as if she had done me a huge favor was ridiculous. I would have tolerated most of her outburst, but that comment really irritated me. So, I told her she hadn't done me any favors, not then, and certainly not now. She never cared about me, so it was absurd for her to expect me to do the same for her. I asked her politely to leave, but she refused and kept screaming at me, completely undermining my authority. At that point, I decided to call the police to have her escorted out because I couldn't deal with that level of drama. I'm already busy with work, and I don't need that added stress. Once the cops arrived, she didn't have much to say and just left quietly. It's been a few days since then, and I haven't heard from her, so I assume she's going to leave us alone now. But even if she doesn't, I'm prepared to take further steps. If necessary, I'll get a restraining order against her.
Hey, welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Mike Thompson stood in his garage, methodically packing his fishing gear for the weekend trip. At 38, he still had the enthusiasm of a boy when it came to these outings with his high school buddies. 15 years as a postal worker had given him an appreciation for order, and it showed in the careful way he arranged his tackle box. He hummed contentedly, picking up his favorite fishing rod, a gleaming beauty Rachel had given him for their anniversary 3 years ago. The weight of it in his hands brought a smile to his face. It was moments like these, surrounded by the familiar scent of motor oil and grass clippings, that Mike felt truly at peace. The garage door was slightly ajar, letting in a warm breeze and, unknowingly to Mike, creating an unintended audio channel to the kitchen. As he reached for his cooler, Rachel's voice drifted clearly from the house. "He's gone for the weekend. You can come over for a wild night." Mike's hand froze on the cooler's handle. The words hung in the air, as tangible as the fishing lures scattered across his workbench. For a moment, he thought he must have misheard. Rachel, his wife of 12 years, couldn't possibly. But as the implications of what he'd heard sank in, Mike's mind began racing, connecting dots he'd subconsciously noticed but dismissed over the past few months. Rachel's new clothes, the late nights at work, her sudden interest in going to the gym. Each memory now took on a sinister new meaning. Mike forced himself to take a deep breath. His hand shook slightly as he continued packing, every movement now a conscious effort to appear normal. The fishing trip, which had been the focus of his excitement all week, now seemed like a distant, unimportant thing. With the car loaded, Mike steeled himself and entered the house. Rachel was in the kitchen, phone nowhere in sight, looking for all the world like the loving wife he'd always believed her to be. "All packed, honey?" she asked, smiling up at him. Mike nodded, forcing a smile of his own. "Yeah, just about. Just need to grab my toiletries." He leaned in to kiss her goodbye, and as their lips met, Mike tasted the lie. The familiar scent of her perfume now seemed cloying, suffocating. He pulled away, maintaining his facade with effort. "Have a great time," Rachel said, squeezing his arm affectionately. "I'll miss you." "I'll miss you too," Mike replied, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. "Love you." As he drove away, Mike watched Rachel in the rearview mirror. She stood on the porch, waving, the perfect picture of a devoted wife. But even as he turned the corner, he saw her reaching for her phone again, no doubt to continue the conversation he'd interrupted. Mike's mind was in turmoil as he drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Instead of heading to the lake where his friends were waiting, he found himself pulling into a secluded spot with a clear view of their house. He put the car in park and sat back, his heart pounding. What was he doing? Part of him screamed to confront Rachel, to demand answers. Another part insisted this was all a misunderstanding, that there must be an innocent explanation. But the cold, logical part of his brain, the part that had made him an efficient postal worker for 15 years, knew better. So Mike waited, his fishing gear untouched in the back of the car, his eyes fixed on the house he'd called home for over a decade. The house where, at that very moment, his wife was preparing to betray him. Dusk fell over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. Mike sat vigil in his car, his body stiff from hours of inactivity, his mind a whirlpool of emotions. He'd texted his friends, making up an excuse about a family emergency. They'd been disappointed but understanding. If only they knew the real emergency unfolding. At 8:43 p.m., a red sports car turned onto their street. Mike's stomach churned as he recognized it. Steve's car. Steve, Rachel's co-worker of 2 years. Steve, who'd been to their barbecues, who'd complimented Mike on his grilling skills. Steve, who was now confidently approaching the front door of Mike's house to sleep with Mike's wife. With shaking hands, Mike pulled out his phone and started recording. The porch light illuminated Steve's face clearly as Rachel opened the door, the two of them exchanging a brief hug before Steve disappeared inside. Mike zoomed in, making sure to capture every detail. He felt sick, but he kept recording. As the night wore on, Mike documented the telling dance of lights in the house. At 9:15 p.m., the living room lights dimmed. Mike imagined them sitting on the couch he and Rachel had picked out together, sharing a bottle of wine, laughing at inside jokes. At 9:30 p.m., the bedroom lights came on. Mike's heart clenched. That was their bedroom, where he and Rachel had spent countless nights talking, laughing, making love. Now, it was the scene of her betrayal. Throughout the night, the bathroom light flicked on and off periodically. Each time it did, it felt like a dagger to Mike's heart. He remained resolutely in his car, fighting waves of nausea and the overwhelming urge to storm into the house and confront them. At 11:52 p.m., movement in the backyard caught Mike's attention. His breath caught in his throat as he saw Rachel and Steve making their way to the hot tub. The hot tub Mike had installed as a surprise for their 10th anniversary. He zoomed in with his phone, his hands steady despite the turmoil in his heart, capturing damning evidence of their intimacy. As the night wore on, Mike battled exhaustion and conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to close his eyes, to pretend this was all a bad dream, but he knew the importance of what he was doing. Each photo, each video was a piece of evidence, a shield against the lies he knew would come. At some point, despite his best efforts, Mike dozed off. He jolted awake at 5:17 a.m., momentarily disoriented. Then he saw Steve's furtive exit from the house, and reality came crashing back. Mike raised his phone, recording Steve's walk of shame back to his red sports car. As Steve drove away, Mike sat in his car, feeling hollow. The night's vigil had left him drained, both physically and emotionally. But as the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, a new emotion began to take root in Mike's heart. It wasn't just sadness or betrayal anymore. It was determination to protect himself, to seek justice, to take control of the situation Rachel had thrust upon him. With a deep breath, Mike started his car. He had a long drive ahead of him, both literally and figuratively. But for now, he had a fishing trip to fake and evidence to secure. Sunday evening found Mike pulling into his driveway, his fishing gear untouched, his mind a battleground of emotions. As he cut the engine, he saw Rachel come out onto the porch, a smile on her face that now seemed like a grotesque mask to Mike. "Hey, honey," she called, walking over to greet him with a hug. How was the trip? As Rachel's arms encircled him, Mike caught the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to her skin. His stomach turned, but he managed to return the hug, forcing a tired smile. "It was good," he lied, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Caught a few nice ones. How about you? Have a quiet weekend?" Rachel nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Mike now recognized as a tell when she was lying. "Oh, just caught up on some reading, did a bit of cleaning. Nothing exciting." Mike listened as Rachel recounted her quiet weekend at home, each lie stoking the fire of his resolve. He nodded at appropriate intervals, asking the occasional question, all while cataloging the inconsistencies. There was a wine glass in the sink, though Rachel claimed she hadn't had a drink. The hot tub cover was slightly askew, despite Rachel insisting she hadn't used it. That night, as they lay in bed, Mike found himself unable to sleep. The weight of Rachel's betrayal pressed down on him, made all the more unbearable by her peaceful breathing beside him. In the dark, with only the soft glow of the alarm clock for company, Mike began to plan. He started a mental log of Rachel's activities, noting times, dates, and coincidences with Steve's schedule. Tomorrow, he'd start documenting everything. He'd need evidence, cold, hard facts that couldn't be denied or explained away. Over the next week, Mike threw himself into his plan with the same meticulous attention to detail that made him an excellent postal worker. He volunteered for overtime shifts, explaining to Rachel that it was for a special surprise. Her eyes had lit up at that, and Mike had to swallow back a surge of bitterness. If only she knew. In reality, each extra hour worked went into a secret account Mike opened at a different bank. He knew he'd need resources for what was to come, and he wasn't about to let Rachel's betrayal leave him financially vulnerable as well. At home, Mike started paying more attention to their teenage daughter, Emma. He noticed her confusion at Rachel's frequent absences, the hurt in her eyes when her mother missed another soccer game. Mike's heart ached for Emma, caught in the crossfire of her mother's selfishness. He began building a stronger bond with Emma, helping with her homework, and really listening when she talked about her day. They started having dinner together on the nights Rachel was working late. And Mike found himself treasuring these moments of genuine connection amidst the turmoil of his crumbling marriage. All the while, Mike carefully maintained his routine, giving Rachel no reason to suspect he knew about her infidelity. He kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day in the evenings, even initiated sex occasionally to avoid raising suspicion. Each act felt like a betrayal of his own integrity, but Mike knew it was necessary. He was building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for the storm to come. In quiet moments, when the weight of his knowledge threatened to overwhelm him, Mike reminded himself of what was at stake. This wasn't just about him and Rachel anymore. It was about Emma, about their future, about justice. And so, despite the pain, despite the anger and betrayal churning inside him, Mike pressed on. He documented credit card statements, showing Rachel's unusual purchases, lingerie she never wore for him, expensive restaurants she never mentioned. He created a secure email account to communicate with a divorce lawyer, laying out his situation in clear, unemotional terms. Mike spent hours researching Pennsylvania divorce laws, understanding the impact of infidelity on settlements. He was determined to be prepared, to protect himself and Emma from the fallout of Rachel's actions. As the days turned into weeks, Mike's plan took shape. He was no longer just Mike Thompson, unsuspecting husband and devoted father. He was becoming something else, a man with a mission, a silent storm gathering strength, preparing to unleash justice on those who had wronged him. The calm before the storm was coming to an end. Soon, very soon, Rachel would learn the consequences of her actions, and Mike would be ready. Mike Thompson's life had become a carefully orchestrated performance. To the outside world, he was still the same dependable postal worker, loving husband and devoted father. But behind the facade, a storm was brewing. Over the next month, Mike transformed into a silent detective in his own home. He noted Rachel's patterns with the precision of a scientist observing a specimen. Late nights at work conveniently fell on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Girls' nights out suspiciously coincided with the evenings when Steve's wife, Sarah, had her book club meetings. Mike's hand shook slightly as he installed a hidden camera in their living room. The new digital photo frame seemed innocuous enough, a thoughtful gift for Rachel to display their family photos. She had no idea that it was capturing her betrayal in high definition. The first time Mike watched footage of Rachel and Steve together in his own home, he felt physically ill. There they were, laughing on the couch he and Rachel had picked out together, sharing wine from the glasses they'd received as a wedding gift. The evidence was undeniable. Each video clipped another nail in the coffin of his marriage. In a twist of fate that Mike found grimly ironic, he found himself befriending Sarah, Steve's wife. Under the pretense of planning a surprise anniversary party for Rachel, Mike reached out to the unsuspecting woman. "Steve talks about you all the time." Sarah gushed over coffee one afternoon. "He says you're the best thing that ever happened to him." Mike nodded, forcing a smile as guilt gnawed at his insides. He was about to shatter this woman's world, just as it had been shattered. But the alternative, letting her live in blissful ignorance while her husband made a fool of her, seemed even crueler. At home, Mike noticed the toll Rachel's deception was taking on their daughter Emma. The teenager's confusion was palpable, her hurt evident in the slump of her shoulders and the furrow of her brow. "Mom's been working so hard lately," Emma mentioned offhandedly one evening as Mike helped her with her math homework. "I hardly see her anymore." Mike's heart clenched. He wanted to tell Emma the truth, to protect her from the pain that was coming. Instead, he simply nodded and changed the subject. Later that week, while tidying up Emma's room, Mike found a report card tucked away in a drawer. Rachel's signature was conspicuously absent, the form forgotten in her web of lies and distractions. Determined to be the stable presence Emma needed, Mike intensified his bonding efforts with his daughter. He attended every one of her soccer games, noting with a mixture of sadness and anger Rachel's frequent absences. They started a tradition of Sunday morning hikes, giving Mike precious insight into Emma's thoughts and feelings. During one such hike, as they paused to admire a particularly beautiful vista, Emma turned to Mike with a vulnerability that made her seem much younger than her 15 years. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "is everything okay with you and Mom?" Mike's heart raced. He wanted to spill everything, to unburden himself to his daughter. But he knew it wasn't fair to put that weight on her shoulders. "Not yet. We're just going through a bit of a rough patch, sweetie," he said, pulling her into a hug. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." As Emma nestled into his embrace, Mike felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Emma, for her future, for her right to trust and believe in love. With careful deliberation, Mike reached out to Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda. Over a casual dinner, he expressed concern about Rachel's behavior, hinting at potential issues without revealing the full extent of his knowledge. "I'm probably overreacting," he said, watching their faces carefully. "But I thought you should know. Maybe you could keep an eye out at the anniversary party." Tom and Linda exchanged worried glances. Mike could see the seeds of doubt he'd planted taking root. He asked them not to confront Rachel, suggesting they observe for themselves at the upcoming celebration. They agreed, their concern for their daughter evident in their furrowed brows and quiet sighs. As the weeks passed, Mike consulted with his lawyer about custody options. He learned about Pennsylvania's preference for shared custody, but his lawyer assured him that his meticulous documentation of Rachel's behavior and his own involvement in Emma's life would work in his favor. Mike threw himself into subtly documenting his role as a father. He saved every receipt from school supply shopping trips, took countless photos at Emma's events, and kept a detailed log of the time he spent helping with homework and school projects. Each piece of evidence was another sandbag in the levee he was building to protect his and Emma's future. As Mike's case against Rachel grew stronger, so did the storm brewing on the horizon. The calm facade he presented to the world belied the tempest of emotions roiling beneath the surface. Soon, very soon, the gathering storm would break. And when it did, Mike would be ready. Mike stood in the kitchen, a calendar in his hand and a forced smile on his face. "I've been thinking," he said to Rachel, who was absently scrolling through her phone. "Our 15th anniversary is coming up. We should do something special." Rachel looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" "A party," Mike said, his voice brimming with an enthusiasm he didn't feel. "A big celebration with all our friends and family. We've been through so much together. We should mark the occasion properly." Rachel's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That sounds nice. But isn't it a bit much? Maybe we could just have a quiet dinner, just the two of us." Mike shook his head, maintaining his cheerful facade. "Nonsense. 15 years is a big deal. We should celebrate with everyone we love." As Rachel reluctantly agreed, Mike could see the discomfort in her body language. It only fueled his determination. Over the next few weeks, Mike threw himself into party planning with suspicious enthusiasm. He booked a private room at the most upscale restaurant in town, a place known for its romantic ambience and exquisite cuisine. The irony wasn't lost on him. Invitations went out to family, friends, and co-workers, including Steve and Sarah. Mike took particular care with that invitation, making sure it was addressed to both of them, a subtle reminder of the vows Steve was betraying. "We have to invite your parents," Mike insisted when Rachel balked at the idea. "They'd be hurt if we left them out." Rachel's reluctance was palpable, but she couldn't argue without raising suspicion. Mike watched as she forced a smile and nodded, adding her parents to the guest list. As the party approached, Mike noticed Rachel becoming increasingly anxious. She made several secretive phone calls, her voice hushed and urgent. Mike recorded each one, adding them to his growing collection of evidence. "Maybe we should scale back the party," Rachel suggested one evening, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. "It just seems like a lot of fuss." Mike reached out and took her hand, suppressing a shudder at the contact. "Nonsense," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You deserve to be celebrated properly." The week before the party, Mike executed the next phase of his plan. Using a secure, anonymous email account, he sent a carefully worded message to Rachel and Steve's HR department. The email hinted at an inappropriate workplace relationship, suggesting they check company communication logs and security camera footage. Mike knew the email would set off alarm bells. He imagined the HR team scrambling to investigate, the whispers that would start to circulate. It was the beginning of the end for Rachel and Steve's carefully constructed lie. 2 days before the party, Mike overheard Rachel arguing with Steve on the phone. He pressed his ear to the study door, his heart racing as he listened to their heated exchange. "We need to cool things off," Rachel was saying, her voice tight with worry. "People are starting to notice. The party this weekend, it's too risky." Steve's voice was muffled, but Mike could hear the resistance in his tone. "You're overreacting," Steve insisted. "No one suspects anything. We just need to act normal." As Rachel continued to argue, Mike silently retreated. A grim smile played on his lips. The cracks were beginning to show. The night before the party, Mike put the final touches on his presentation. The slideshow was a masterpiece of deception. Happy photos of their life together, carefully selected to showcase their seemingly perfect marriage. But hidden within the code was a devastating twist, ready to be unleashed at the touch of a button. As Rachel slept beside him, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break, Mike carefully placed copies of his evidence in envelopes. Each one was labeled with a name: Rachel's parents, Sarah, key friends and colleagues. Tomorrow, their world would shatter, and Mike would be the one holding the hammer. The private room at Le Chateau buzzed with excitement. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over the elegantly set tables, and the gentle clink of champagne glasses filled the air. To anyone looking in, it appeared to be nothing more than a joyous anniversary celebration. Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda, stood near the bar, their eyes fixed on their daughter. The concern Mike had planted weeks ago had clearly taken root, evident in the furrow of Tom's brow and the tight set of Linda's mouth. "She seems off, doesn't she?" Linda murmured to her husband, watching as Rachel laughed a little too loudly at something a co-worker said. Tom nodded, his frown deepening. Mike was right to be worried. Something's not right here. Across the room, Steve and Sarah arrived, their entrance causing a ripple of tension that only Mike seemed to notice. Steve's eyes darted around the room, pointedly avoiding Rachel. Sarah, oblivious to the undercurrents, beamed as she handed Mike a beautifully wrapped gift. 15 years, she said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "You and Rachel are such an inspiration." Mike accepted the gift with a gracious smile, tamping down the guilt that threatened to surface. Soon, very soon, Sarah's world would crumble. But Mike reminded himself that the truth, however painful, was better than living a lie. As the evening progressed, Mike played the perfect host. He circulated among the guests, charming and attentive, all while acutely aware of the storm about to break. He noticed a few of Rachel's co-workers huddled in a corner, their whispers no doubt about the recent HR investigations. The trap was closing in. Midway through dinner, Mike stood, gently tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Rachel looked up, a flicker of nervousness crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "Friends, family," Mike began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate 15 years of marriage with Rachel and me." He clicked a button on the remote in his hand, and the large screen behind him came to life. A slideshow began, showing happy moments from their years together, their wedding day, vacations, the day Emma was born. "When I met Rachel," Mike continued, his eyes scanning the room, "I thought I was the luckiest man alive. And for many years, I was sure of it." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her smile wobbling. If Mike hadn't known better, he might have been fooled by her performance. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Mike's tone shifted, almost imperceptibly. Sometimes the surprises are wonderful, and sometimes... He clicked the remote again. The happy images on the screen suddenly gave way to something else entirely. Photos of Rachel and Steve together, screenshots of intimate text messages, video clips that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The room fell silent, the kind of heavy, shocked silence that feels like a physical weight. Mike's calm voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Sometimes the surprises shatter everything we thought we knew." What happened next was chaos in slow motion. Rachel, her face drained of all color, tried to stand, to reach Mike, but her legs gave out. Her father, fury etched into every line of his face, blocked her path. Steve made a dash for the door, but found his way barred by Sarah, her expression a mixture of devastation and rage. "How could you?" she screamed, her voice raw with pain. Mike continued his narration, his voice steady as he laid out the extent of Rachel and Steve's betrayal. He played audio recordings of their conversations, displayed screenshots of their secret communications. With each new piece of evidence, the gravity of the situation seemed to press down harder on everyone in the room. As the final slide appeared, divorce papers already signed by Mike, the room erupted. Rachel's sobs were nearly drowned out by the angry voices of their friends and family. Some of Rachel's co-workers were already on their phones, no doubt calling HR to report what they'd seen. Mike raised his hands, calling for silence. Remarkably, the room quieted, all eyes turning to him once more. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion for the first time that night. "I'm sorry to Sarah and to Tom and Linda. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't let this deception continue." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I'll be taking a leave of absence from work to focus on my daughter, Emma. I ask for your privacy and understanding in the coming weeks." As Mike made his way to the exit, he paused to hand envelopes to Rachel's parents and Sarah. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said quietly. "I'm truly sorry." The last thing Mike saw as he walked out of the restaurant was Rachel crumpling to the floor, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. He felt a moment of pity, quickly overwhelmed by a sense of justice served. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Mike took a deep breath. The storm had broken. The truth was out. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it head on. The morning after the anniversary party, Mike Thompson sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold before him. The house was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation of the storm to come. He didn't have to wait long. His phone buzzed incessantly, a barrage of messages and missed calls from Rachel. Mike ignored them all. He had said his piece last night. Now, it was time to weather the fallout. As the day wore on, reports began filtering in from friends and family. Rachel, it seemed, had launched a desperate smear campaign. She was telling anyone who would listen that Mike had been controlling and abusive throughout their marriage, that she had only sought comfort in Steve's arms because of Mike's cruelty. Mike listened to each account calmly, his face betraying no emotion. When the concerned callers finished, he would simply say, "I understand. I'll be sending you some information shortly." Then he would hang up and add another name to his list. By evening, Mike had emailed his meticulously gathered evidence to everyone in their inner circle. Text messages, photos, video clips, credit card statements. A mountain of irrefutable proof of Rachel's infidelity and lies. The next morning, Mike walked into the offices of Patricia Reeves. ESQ, the lawyer's reputation for ruthless efficiency, preceded her, and Mike had to dip into his overtime savings to afford her services. But as he laid out his case, showing Patricia the evidence he'd gathered, he knew it was worth every penny. "Mr. Thompson," Patricia said, leaning back in her chair with a predatory smile, "I think we have a very strong case here. Rachel won't know what hit her." Meanwhile, across town, Rachel sat in her own lawyer's office, her face pale and drawn. She had spent the morning trying to delete incriminating emails and texts, only to realize with growing horror that Mike must have copies of everything. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," her lawyer said, his voice grave as he reviewed the evidence Mike had sent over. "But I'm afraid you have no leverage here. The infidelity is established beyond doubt, and Mr. Thompson has documented everything meticulously. We're going to have to advise you to settle." Rachel's world continued to crumble around her. Her parents, disgusted by her behavior and lies, refused to support her financially or emotionally. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her letters returned unopened. The comfortable life she had taken for granted was slipping through her fingers like sand. At home, Mike faced a different battle. Emma, devastated by the revelations about her mother, had retreated into herself. She refused to speak to either parent, locking herself in her room for hours on end. Mike focused on being a stable presence, maintaining their routines as much as possible. He left meals outside Emma's door, kept her favorite snacks stocked in the pantry, and continued to drive her to and from school in silence. After a week of this, Mike made a decision. He reached out to Dr. Samantha Carter, a therapist specializing in adolescent trauma. "Emma's hurting," Mike explained during their initial consultation. "And as much as I know I can't fix this for her. She needs professional help." Dr. Carter nodded sympathetically. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Thompson. Bringing Emma in for therapy is a crucial step in helping her process this trauma." Gradually, with Dr. Carter's help, Emma began to open up. She started joining Mike for meals again, and even initiated conversations about mundane topics like school and her friends. Mike cherished these moments, seeing them as small victories in the long battle ahead. Through it all, Mike continued to document every interaction meticulously. He kept a detailed log of all the time he spent with Emma, saved receipts for all expenses related to her care and activities, and recorded any attempts by Rachel to contact or manipulate their daughter. As the divorce proceedings began in earnest, Mike's evidence painted a clear and damning picture. Rachel's infidelity was established beyond any doubt, and Mike's role as the primary caregiver became evident through his extensive documentation. In the courtroom, Patricia Reeves argued convincingly for Mike to receive primary custody of Emma. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "Mr. Thompson has been the stable, consistent presence in Emma's life. While Mrs. Thompson was engaged in her affair, Mr. Thompson was attending parent-teacher conferences, helping with homework, and providing the emotional support Emma needed. It's clear that Emma's best interests lie in remaining primarily with her father." As Mike listened to Patricia lay out their case, he felt a mix of sadness and vindication. This wasn't the future he had envisioned when he married Rachel 15 years ago, but he was determined to make the best of it for Emma's sake and his own. The battle had begun in earnest, and Mike was prepared to fight with everything he had. As weeks passed, the full consequences of Rachel's actions became increasingly apparent. The comfortable life she had known, the respect she had enjoyed in their social circle, all of it crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Rachel's parents, Tom and Linda, once doting and ever present in their lives, now refused to even speak to their daughter. Rachel's desperate calls went straight to voicemail. Her tear-stained letters returned unopened. The pain of their rejection was a constant, gnawing ache in Rachel's chest. One afternoon, Rachel stood at her parents' front door, hand poised to knock. She could hear movement inside, knew they were home, but as minutes ticked by and her knocks went unanswered, The harsh reality of her situation truly sank in. She had lost not just her husband and daughter, but her entire support system. Steve, the man for whom Rachel had risked everything, proved to be as unreliable as Mike had always suspected. Pressured by his own impending divorce and the scandal that now surrounded him, Steve cut all ties with Rachel. His last text message to her was brief and cruel. "This is too much. Don't contact me again." Rachel read and reread the message, tears blurring her vision. She had thrown away 15 years of marriage, had hurt her daughter deeply, all for a man who abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. The workplace investigation, triggered by Mike's anonymous tip, concluded with devastating results. Both Rachel and Steve were fired for violating company policies. The HR manager's words still rang in Rachel's ears. "Your behavior has brought disgrace to this company. We have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." In their small town, news traveled fast. The scandal of Rachel and Steve's affair, coupled with the dramatic revelation at the anniversary party, made finding new employment nearly impossible. Whispers followed Rachel wherever she went, sidelong glances, and abruptly ended conversations, making it clear that she was now a pariah in the community she had once called home. Rachel faced financial ruin, unable to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. The house she had shared with Mike was now solely his, the joint bank accounts frozen. She found herself staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the peeling wallpaper and musty smell a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. Meanwhile, Mike's unwavering focus on being the stable parent was paying off. Emma, still deeply hurt but slowly healing, had chosen to live primarily with her father. The court had acknowledged Mike's consistent presence in Emma's life, impressed by the meticulous records he had kept of his involvement in her day-to-day activities. During one of their therapy sessions, Emma had finally opened up about her feelings. "I'm still so angry at Mom," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Dad, he's been my rock through all of this. I don't know what I'd do without him." Dr. Carter nodded encouragingly. "It's okay to be angry, Emma. What your mother did has hurt you deeply. But it's good that you recognize your father's support. That stability is crucial for your healing process." The court's decision reflected this reality. Rachel's visitation rights were limited due to concerns about her stability. She was allowed supervised visits twice a month, a far cry from the daily presence she had once had in Emma's life. As the divorce neared finalization, Rachel made one last, desperate attempt to salvage what she had lost. Late one night, she appeared at Mike's door, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Mike, please," she begged, her voice cracking with emotion. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through this, can't we? For Emma's sake, for the sake of our family." Mike listened calmly, his face impassive. The sight of Rachel, once so put together and confident, now broken and pleading, stirred a complex mix of emotions in him. But the trust that had been shattered could not be so easily repaired. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But what's done is done. There's no going back. Instead of trying to fix what can't be fixed, I think you should focus on rebuilding your relationship with Emma. She needs her mother, even if things can't be the way they were before." As Rachel's shoulders slumped in defeat, Mike felt a weight lift from his own. He had faced the storm head-on and had come out stronger on the other side. In the quiet moments between the legal battles and emotional upheavals, Mike focused on helping Emma navigate the complex emotions of their new reality. They had honest conversations about trust, forgiveness, and consequences. "Emma," Mike said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, "I want you to know that it's okay to still love your mom. What she did was wrong, and it's okay to be angry about that. But she's still your mother, and it's okay to have a relationship with her if that's what you want." Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I don't know if I can forgive her," she admitted softly. Mike wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Forgiveness is a journey, sweetheart. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about finding peace for yourself, These conversations, difficult as they were, helped Emma begin to process her feelings. She started to see Mike not just as her father, but as someone of integrity and strength, a model for how to face adversity with grace and resilience. As the dust began to settle, Mike and Emma found themselves forging a new path forward, their bond stronger than ever in the face of the storm they had weathered together. The day the divorce was finalized felt almost anticlimactic after the months of turmoil. Mike sat in the courtroom, his face a mask of calm as the judge read out the terms. Beside him, Patricia Reeves allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. In the matter of Thompson versus Thompson, the judge intoned, the court rules as follows. Primary custody of the minor child, Emma Thompson, is awarded to the father, Michael Thompson. Rachel Thompson is granted supervised visitation twice monthly. Mike's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sadness. This was the outcome he had fought for, but he took no joy in Emma losing full access to her mother. The judge continued, furthermore, Rachel Thompson is ordered to pay child support in the amount of $800 per month. Mike heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath from across the courtroom. He knew this would be a significant financial strain given her current unemployment, but he also knew that Emma deserved that support. Finally, the family home is awarded to Michael Thompson to provide stability for the minor child. As the gavel fell, marking the official end of their marriage, Mike felt a chapter of his life closing. He turned to shake Patricia's hand, murmuring his thanks for her expert handling of the case. Outside the courthouse, Mike paused on the steps, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. He had emerged victorious, but the victory felt hollow. The true challenge lay ahead, building a new life for himself and Emma from the ashes of the old. In the weeks that followed, Mike threw himself into securing their future. He used his share of the divorce settlement wisely, first paying off the remaining mortgage on the house. As he signed the final payment, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This house that had seen so much pain would now be a safe haven for him and Emma, free and clear. Next, he set up a college fund for Emma. Your future is important, he told her as he showed her the account statement. I want you to have every opportunity, no matter what. Emma's eyes had filled with tears, and she had hugged him tightly. These moments of connection, born from the shared pain they had endured, were precious to Mike. The rest of the settlement went into home improvements. Mike and Emma spent weekends painting walls, replacing old carpets with hardwood floors, and planting a small vegetable garden in the backyard. Each change, no matter how small, felt like a fresh start. At work, Mike's professionalism during the ordeal had not gone unnoticed. His supervisor called him into the office one afternoon, a rare occurrence that initially filled Mike with apprehension. Thompson, the supervisor said, leaning back in his chair, I've been impressed with how you've handled yourself these past months. Despite everything going on in your personal life, your work hasn't suffered. In fact, you've been one of our most reliable employees. Mike nodded, unsure where this was going. We've had a supervisory position open up, the supervisor continued. I'd like you to consider taking it. It comes with a pay raise, of course, and more flexible hours. Could be good for you and Emma. The promotion was unexpected but welcome. The flexible hours allowed Mike to be there for Emma in ways he couldn't before, attending her soccer games and school events without having to juggle his work schedule. More than that, Mike found satisfaction in mentoring younger postal workers. He saw a bit of his younger self in them and took pride in helping them navigate the ins and outs of the job. 2 years after the divorce, Mike heard through mutual friends about Rachel. She had moved to another state, starting over in a new city where her past was unknown. She had found entry-level work, slowly rebuilding her career from the ground up. Most surprisingly, Rachel was in therapy, working through the personal issues that had led to her infidelity. Mike felt a complex mix of emotions at this news, a lingering anger, yes, but also a glimmer of hope that Rachel was finally confronting her demons. Emma, now in college, had a complicated but improving relationship with her mother. They had bi-weekly phone calls, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. During school breaks, Emma would sometimes visit Rachel, their relationship evolving into a more adult dynamic. Despite his personal feelings about Rachel, Mike supported these interactions. He recognized Emma's need for both parents in her life, even if the family unit they had once known was gone forever. "How was your visit with your mom?" Mike would ask when Emma returned from these trips, keeping his tone neutral and supportive. Emma would usually shrug, a small smile playing on her lips. "It was okay. Better than last time. We're working on it." As time passed, Mike found himself reflecting on the journey they had been through. One crisp autumn morning, as he and Emma prepared for a fishing trip, he realized something profound. He was happy, not the naive, unquestioning happiness of his early marriage, but a deeper, hard-won contentment. He had emerged from the crucible of betrayal and divorce stronger, more confident in himself and his abilities. He had dated casually over the past couple of years, but found that his primary focus remained on his relationship with Emma and his own personal growth. As they drove to the lake, the same lake Mike had been headed to when he discovered Rachel's affair, he glanced at Emma in the passenger seat. She was no longer the hurt, confused teenager she had been during the divorce. She had grown into a strong, compassionate young woman, resilient in the face of adversity. They arrived at the lake just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the calm water. Mike showed Emma how to bait her hook, his hand steady as he guided hers. "You know," he said as they cast their lines into the water, "I used to come here with my dad when I was about your age. He taught me everything I know about fishing." Emma smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that warmed Mike's heart. "And now you're teaching me. It's like a family tradition." Mike nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, it is. A new tradition for our new life." As they sat in comfortable silence, waiting for the fish to bite, Mike looked at his daughter. He saw the strong, compassionate young woman she was becoming, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The path had been difficult, fraught with pain and betrayal. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming their faces and sparkling off the lake's surface, Mike knew that they had weathered the storm. They had emerged not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and with a deep appreciation for the bond between them. In that moment, with his daughter by his side and the peaceful lake stretching out before them, Mike Thompson felt truly at peace. The silent storm had passed, and in its wake, a new day had dawned. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I've always lived a simple life, happy with a steady job and some peace and quiet. I learned the value of hard work and discipline from my dad, who taught me everything about welding. It wasn't glamorous, but I took pride in the craftsmanship. I never needed much, just a job and someone to share my life with. That someone was Lucy, my high school sweetheart, who I thought would be my partner forever. But life has a way of surprising you. Our relationship started with big dreams, full of optimism, but reality hit hard. I worked long hours, often out of town, while Lucy went to college on the money I earned. I thought things were good, but little cracks started to show, and soon our marriage was falling apart. One night, driving down the highway with the radio on, I couldn't escape the memories of Lucy and everything that went wrong. I switched to a talk show about UFOs, anything to distract me. The truth was, I didn't just leave her, I ran, trying to escape the betrayal. Let me back up. I'm Stan Shipman. I was married to Lucy for 5 years. We were high school sweethearts and rushed into marriage thinking love would be enough. I was wrong. Money was never a problem. I've been a welder since I was a kid, taught by my dad. After high school, I breezed through welding school and started working right away. I even did underwater welding and made good money, enough to put Lucy through college. Now she's a paralegal at a big law firm downtown. So why am I running? Why am I on the freeway in the middle of the night? It all comes down to the woman I married and her bad influence of a friend. Lucy used to be sweet, but things changed. I loved her, and I didn't hesitate to pay for her college, despite her parents thinking I'd go broke. They underestimated me. She graduated debt-free, thanks to me. Things went downhill after she started working at McMaster in Fredericks. At first it was fine, but then her coworkers started influencing her. She'd go out with them once a week, which didn't bother me at first, but soon it became twice a week, including Fridays, our date night. When I brought it up, she brushed it off, saying we could go out on Saturdays and that she deserved time with her friends. Then, her nights out stretched later and later, and her calls went straight to voicemail. I finally confronted her one Saturday morning. I asked what was going on with her late-night outings and if she was seeing someone else. She denied it, saying they just went for a bite to eat after drinks. I told her it needed to stop, and she agreed, promising to quit going out on Fridays. For a few weeks, things seemed to improve, but soon enough, she was back to her old habits. Suspicious, I installed a phone finder app on her phone to track her location. One Friday, I followed her to a bar. Inside, I found her sitting with a group, including one guy she was way too friendly with. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring, and when I confronted her, she claimed she took it off so she wouldn't lose it. One of the guys, Jake, stood up and introduced himself, smirking as he mentioned he worked with Lucy. The group chuckled, except Lucy. Jake squeezed my hand, trying to intimidate me, but he couldn't. I squeezed back, crushing his soft hand until I saw him wince and let go. "I was just going to ask your wife to dance if that's cool," he said, rubbing his hand. I looked at Lucy. "Is that true?" I asked, and she nodded slowly. Thinking this might reveal more, I nodded back. "Go ahead, but remember, she's my wife, and I'll be watching." Lucy got up to dance, and I took Jake's seat, ordering a beer as most of the others drifted off. "You don't own her, you know," said the woman next to me. "And you are?" I asked. Marie Compton. I've been mentoring Lucy, showing her the ropes." "Right. So Marie, who are you to give me marriage advice?" I asked. "I'm her friend, and like I said, I'm mentoring her. The partners like her, and she's got potential." I didn't like her tone and wondered what she was feeding Lucy. "Well, I'm her husband. If something's interfering with our marriage, I need to know." "Stan, Lucy needs to broaden her horizons," Marie said. "She's only ever known you in college. She needs to spread her wings." "Spread her wings? Or maybe something else?" I shot back. "No need to be crude," Marie said. "But yes, maybe she needs to explore other things. You'll benefit in the end." "Oh, really? How?" I asked. "She might learn a few things to bring back to you. I'm sure you're seeing someone when you're away on jobs, right?" "No, Marie. I work, get paid, and come home. I love Lucy and would never hurt her." "Maybe you should broaden your horizons too," she smirked. "I take my vows seriously. I trust Lucy does too. I notice you're not wearing a ring. Ever been married?" "Twice," she said. "Let me guess, you cheated on them, didn't you?" I asked. She shrugged. "Yeah, so? I do what I want." "Well, Lucy's taken, and I expect you to respect that." Marie chuckled. "Sure, you keep thinking that," she said. Jake and Lucy returned from the dance floor, and I stood to let Lucy sit between me and Marie, blocking Jake from sitting next to her. He didn't look happy, but I didn't care. "So, Lucy tells me you're a welder. What do welders make these days, $15 an hour?" Jake asked. "Actually, I make over 35, more if I work underwater. I also paid for Lucy's college," I replied. "You're paying off her loans?" he asked. "No, she has no loans because I paid in full. I also bought her that new Toyota." "Didn't know welders made that much, but you get lots of women when you're out of town, huh?" he said, elbowing me. "No, I work 16 hours a day when I'm away. I take my vows seriously," I said. Jake smirked, and I didn't like where this conversation was going. I turned to Lucy. "Did you drive here?" "Yes," she said. "Good. I've had enough fun. I'm going home. I expect you to follow soon." I got up, knocking my cold beer into Jake's lap. "Oops, sorry. Better go change those pants." Jake stood furious, but backed down when I warned him. "Smart move," I said, turning to Lucy. "You coming?" "I'm right behind you," she said quietly. Marie glared at me, but I didn't look back as I left. Lucy arrived home a few minutes after me. She stormed in, upset. "What the hell was that? You embarrassed me." "I embarrassed you," I replied. "Are you following me?" she asked. "No, I was just grabbing a beer and saw you with your friends," I lied, something I hadn't done before. If anyone should be embarrassed, it's me. Seeing my wife acting like a giddy schoolgirl with some guy and without her wedding ring made me feel like you're ashamed of me. "Is that it?" Her face softened. "Of course not. I just work with these people, and Jake's the attorney I work with the most." "And Marie?" "She's higher up. She's been mentoring me." "Does that include marriage advice?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "While you were dancing, Marie was telling me you need to broaden your horizons. I asked if that meant spreading your legs too, and she didn't deny it. Be honest, Lucy. Have you cheated? No, I haven't, she said. But she couldn't look me in the eye. You know I could never forgive that. Marie said you might be cheating when you're gone. Are you? No, I said firmly. We've known each other since 6th grade. Have I ever been unfaithful? She shook her head. No. I love you too much to hurt you. I work hard, often 16-hour days. You've seen my pay stubs. Yes, I know, she said. Then you know I've supported you, bought you a car, paid the bills, and I'm saving for a house. You can tell Marie to shove her advice where it belongs. She's divorced twice for cheating. Lucy was shocked. How do you know? She told me. She seemed proud of it. I don't trust her or Jake. They're up to something, and I don't want you caught in it. You haven't done anything wrong, right? No, I haven't, she said. I just enjoy going out with them. I'd like to spend time with you, too. Think you can start hanging out with your husband again? Of course, she said, wrapping her arms around me. I'm sorry. That's okay. There are only 3 things I've ever wanted. To be married to you, to be the best welder, and to have a family with you. She smiled. Well, you've got the first 2. Ready to work on the 3rd? I smiled back. Let's do it. We spent the rest of that night in the master bedroom, and for a couple of months, things seemed to calm down. Lucy stayed home on Fridays, and I made an effort to be more loving, never bringing up Marie or Jake again, trusting Lucy to do the right thing. Then, one Friday night, I came home to a dark house, except for candles on the dining table. I smelled lasagna cooking and thought Lucy had planned something special. The table was set with our best china, and when I turned around, I saw her in one of the shortest dresses I'd ever seen. It highlighted her legs, which she knew I loved. The dress barely covered her and was completely backless. She wrapped her arms around me, kissed me deeply, and asked, "Do you like what you see?" "Definitely," I replied. "Good. Tonight's going to be special," she said. "It's a surprise. Go clean up and I'll get dinner ready." After washing up, I returned to find the lasagna served, wine poured, and Lucy sitting at the table. I told her I didn't know which looked better, her or the lasagna. She laughed and said, "I hope you enjoy both tonight." As I ate, I started feeling strange and dizzy. I tried to stand but nearly fell. Confused, I looked at Lucy, barely able to speak, before collapsing. When I came to, I was undressed and tied to a chair in our bedroom. My arms and legs were zip-tied, and there was a strange device around my waist. Furious, I shouted, "Lucy, what's going on?" Lucy walked in, but she wasn't alone. Marie was with her. "What is this?" I demanded. "Let me out of this chair." Marie calmly said, "No, it's best you stay put so you can watch your wife expand her horizons." "You pilled me and tied me up for this?" I yelled. "Yes," Marie replied. "Lucy knew you wouldn't agree, so I gave her something to knock you out. Now you can watch, and there's nothing you can do." I looked at Lucy, furious. "You went along with this? You know what this means?" "I'm sorry, but Marie said it's just Zex. It won't affect us, and I still love you." "That's not true, and you know it. I told you I wouldn't tolerate cheating. And what's this thing you put on me?" "It's a cage to remind you who's in charge now," Lucy said. "Untie me right now, or we're done," I warned. Marie walked over and gagged me. "You'll stay quiet while your wife enjoys herself with someone else." I tried to shake my head to stop her from putting the gag in, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't break free from the chair. Marie stood up and walked to the door, letting Jake and another guy from Lucy's office enter. They looked at me and laughed. "Looks like the loser is ready," Jake said. "He's not cooperating," Marie replied. Jake punched me hard in the face. Then again, I could taste blood. Lucy screamed, "Don't hurt him. You promised." "I owe him for ruining my pants. Now he'll watch as I screw his wife." He ripped Lucy's dress off. "Lose the underwear," he told her. Lucy hesitated, then took them off and handed them to Jake, who tossed them at me after sniffing them. Lucy got on her knees and started giving Jake a head while looking directly at me. I was shaking with rage, but Jake and Marie just laughed. "Your wife is good at this," Jake taunted. After he finished, Lucy moved on to the other man. I couldn't bear to watch. "You like watching this, don't you?" Marie asked, filming everything. "Admit it," she pressed, but I shook my head. When Lucy was done, Jake led her to the bed. "Now for the main event," he said, and I closed my eyes as I heard Lucy moaning. "Better than your husband?" Jake asked, and Lucy responded, "Oh yes, so much better." At that moment, all the love I had for her vanished. I had heard about men getting turned on by watching their wives with others, but all I felt was hatred. They went at it for the next hour, with Marie recording everything. When they were done, Jake and the other guy walked over to me. "Enjoy the show?" they mocked, laughing. Then they pushed Lucy and Marie aside and peed on me, covering my face. I thought I'd be sick as Lucy laughed. Jake leaned down and warned me, "Say anything and I'll make your life hell. From now on, your wife is mine. I'll do whatever I want, whenever I want." After they left, Marie walked over. "Don't cause any trouble or it'll get worse," she said. "Let him loose after I'm gone," she told Lucy, then left. Lucy removed the gag and cut the zip ties, then unlocked the cage. She started to say something, but I cut her off, grabbed my clothes, and called emergency. "What are you doing?" she asked, panicking. I told the operator about the attack and illegal detention. Lucy freaked out, trying to grab her phone and keys, but I stopped her. "You're not leaving," I said. "Please don't press charges. I don't want to go to jail." "Trust me, jail is the safest place for you right now," I replied coldly. "Get dressed. The cops will be here soon." "You don't know Jake and Marie. They'll come after you," she warned. "Get dressed," I repeated. Lucy, sensing my resolve, quietly put her clothes on. Her phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Marie. "Everything okay?" I texted back, "Everything's fine. He's not happy, but he'll deal with it." I sent the message, hoping Marie would fall for it. When Lucy came back to the living room, the cops had arrived. I let them in, and they could tell right away something was wrong. One officer took my statement, called for an ambulance, and collected evidence from my face. The other officer talked to Lucy in the bedroom. After conferring outside, they came back in, and Lucy was brought out in handcuffs, crying. "Please don't let them arrest me. It was just for fun," she pleaded. I shook my head and turned away. More police arrived along with an ambulance. A female officer took Lucy away, and the officer who took my statement explained that she was being arrested for illegal detention, pilling, and sexual attack. "We need to take you to the hospital for blood and urine tests to see what they gave you," he said. I agreed, knowing more evidence would help. "You should also get a protection order," he added, handing me a card for a DA's office attorney. "She'll meet you at the hospital." I thanked him and went with the paramedics, who gave me a quick check on the way. At the hospital, they examined me, took samples, and gave me painkillers. Just as I was starting to relax, a woman entered. "Stan Shipman?" she asked. "That's me," I replied. "I'm Linda Calloway, the assistant DA on your case. How are you feeling?" "I've been better, but I'm okay." She briefed me on the situation, telling me that Marie, Jake, and the other man had been arrested. However, they might be released due to their company's influence. "I'm seeking a protection order for you," she said. "Thanks. Do you think it will help?" "Maybe, but no guarantees," she admitted. I understood. "I guess I'll just have to deal with it," she nodded. "They'll be in jail until Monday for now. You might also want to hire a divorce lawyer unless you plan on staying with your wife." "No, I'm done with her," I said. She told me I'd be kept overnight since my apartment was now a crime scene. She also asked if I owned a weapon, and I told her I didn't. After that, I fell asleep and woke up when they moved me to a private room. The next morning, my parents visited, and I told them everything. My father was furious. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm divorcing her," I said. "Good. Let me find you a lawyer," he offered. He also agreed to give me a ride home when I was discharged. Later, Lucy's parents came by, shocked and embarrassed by what she had done. Her father asked if I planned to divorce her, and I confirmed it. "I'm truly sorry," her mother said. "If she needs a place to stay, she can come live with us." I thanked them, grateful for their understanding. After saying goodbye, Lucy's parents left. A couple of hours later, the doctor checked me out and cleared me for discharge. I called my dad to let him know, and my parents arrived just as the paperwork was completed. After the nurse gave me instructions, they wheeled me to the car and we headed home. When we arrived at the apartment, my dad helped me to the door, and we said goodbye again. "Call if you need anything," he reminded me. "Thanks, Dad," I replied. Inside, I noticed the place had been searched by the police. I also saw a message on the answering machine, "Dead meat." The number was private, and after replaying it, I realized it was a recorded line from a Rocky movie, not someone speaking directly. Then, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a brunette who looked familiar from the night I met Jake. I activated my phone's camera, then opened the door, keeping the chain on. "Yes?" I asked as I opened the door slightly. "Mr. Shipman?" A woman's voice responded softly. "That's me. And you are?" "Holly Brinkman. I work with your wife. Can I come in?" "Are you alone?" I asked cautiously. "Yes. I unchained the door and let her in. "What can I do for you, Holly?" I asked, noticing her nervousness. Without a word, she handed me a manila envelope. "What's this?" I asked, taking the envelope. "Please open it," she said quietly. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a pair of gloves, not wanting to leave fingerprints on whatever was inside. I opened the envelope and found photographs of a dead man, hands tied behind his back. I stared at the images. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice tense. "That's my husband, Brian," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Did you report this to the police?" "Yes, but they ruled it a suicide. The firm we work for has influence. They own part of the police force and some judges." "Did Jake have anything to do with this?" I asked, thinking of the implications. "I don't know, but it's possible he ordered it." "So why are you still working there?" I pressed. "I have no choice," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You're not just a legal secretary, are you?" I asked, the reality dawning on me. "No, my husband tried to fight back and he paid the price." "So you're forced to stay, doing—" "Yes, I'm basically there for the attorneys and their clients." "And Marie?" I asked, now connecting the dots. "She's like the madam. She assigns us." "And Lucy?" I hesitated. "She was being groomed, yes," Holly confirmed. I found a note tucked inside the envelope, written with letters cut from a magazine. It read, "Back off or this could be you." "Did you read this?" I asked Holly, showing her the note. "No, it was dropped at my apartment this morning with instructions to hand deliver it." "Would you testify to the DA?" I asked. "No, I want to stay alive. You don't understand how dangerous these people are, especially Marie." "How many people at the firm know about this?" I asked, trying to assess the scale of this. "Everyone at the executive level," she replied. "Thanks for bringing this to me, Holly. I'm truly sorry for your loss. You're a good guy. Lucy's lucky to have you," she said with a sad smile. "Thanks," I said, escorting her to the door. I watched Holly leave, scanning the street to make sure no one was watching. Once the coast was clear, I locked the door behind me. The voicemail in the envelope had just changed everything. I still planned to divorce Lucy, but now the stakes had escalated, and after I dealt with Jake, Lucy would be praying for the Grim Reaper. I stopped the video I had been watching and picked up the phone, dialing Linda's personal cell. "This is Linda Calloway," she answered. I quickly told her about the voicemail and the envelope. "This changes everything. Bring it to me right now," she said urgently, giving me her address. I decided I needed to get out of town for a bit. I packed a bag for a few days, grabbed the meat cage Lucy had used on me, and put everything in my truck. I also packed some basic welding tools, called my boss to ask for time off, and he agreed, saying I had plenty of vacation time. I double-checked everything, locked up, and headed to Linda's condo, arriving within 30 minutes. She was shocked by the photos in the note. "I also have a video of my conversation with the woman who delivered it," I told her. "Let me see it," she said. I played the video, and she was stunned. "This explains a lot. Can I get a copy?" I let her copy the video from my phone. Then I remembered Lucy's phone in my pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "It's Lucy's phone. I grabbed it the night Jake attacked me. You might find something useful." "I'll have someone check it out," she said, then paused. "Maybe I should involve the state or feds. If what Holly said is true, we can't trust our local police." She looked at me. "What are you going to do?" "I'm leaving town for a bit," I replied. "Let me know where you are, okay?" "Will do," I said. I left, unsure of where to go. I withdrew as much cash as I could and kept an eye out for anyone following me. The images of the man who was eliminated haunted me, reminding me that I could be next if I wasn't careful. Late at night, I decided to call an old friend. "Yeah?" said the gruff voice on the other end. "Dave, it's Stan. Stan, what's going on?" "I've got a bit of a situation. Can I crash at your place for a few days?" "Sure, buddy. Just grab a couple of six-packs on your way." "Will do. See you soon." Feeling relieved, I hit the road, stopping at a convenience store to grab some beer, ice, and coffee. I also picked up some cigarettes for Dave, knowing he'd appreciate the gesture. After all, he was letting me stay at his place for a while. Dave Brolin was about 15 years older than me and had worked with my dad. That's how we met, and he became like a big brother. I learned a lot from him while working in my dad's shop. He had a tough upbringing. His father died from mesothelioma after years in the shipyards, and his sister Beverly cared for their mom until she passed from cancer a year ago. I'd known Beverly for a while. She was attractive in a girl-next-door way, but we were more like siblings. I hadn't seen her in a long time and was curious to catch up. Dave had married young, but divorced after finding his wife with a coworker. He never remarried and now looks after Beverly, who lives with him. I arrived at Dave's house around 2:30 a.m. with my stuff and met him on the porch. "Hope you brought beer," he joked. "Of course," I said, handing him smokes. Inside, I saw a stunning blonde coming down the stairs in pajamas. "Who's the blonde bombshell?" I teased. "You know who I am, idiot," she shot back. It was Beverly, grown up, fit, and looking nothing like the girl I remembered. "Beverly, is that really you?" "Yeah, genius. What are you doing here so early? Did Lucy throw you out?" "Not exactly," I said, my voice tight. Noticing my bruised face, Beverly's tone softened. "I'm sorry, Stan. What happened?" "That's why I'm here," I replied. "Grab a beer and tell us," Dave suggested. I grabbed 3 beers and handed them out, teasing Beverly about her age. She flipped me off and smiled, then told me to spill it. So I told them everything about Lucy, Marie, Jake, and showed the video of my meeting with Holly. They were stunned into silence. "Damn," Dave finally said. "Do they know where you are?" "I don't think so. No one followed me." "Good. We're up on this hill and we'll see anyone coming. I still have the weapons I got from your dad. You remember how to shoot, right?" "Yeah, but I haven't touched a weapon since then." "No worries. I'll take you out back to practice." "Bev's become a decent shot too," he said with a grin, and Beverly flashed a mischievous smile. "Does your dad know you're here?" Dave asked. "No, I didn't tell anyone yet. I need to let the assistant DA know, though. I didn't decide to come here until I was already on the road." "I'll call your parents in the morning. Turn off your phone and take out the battery, just in case there's a tracker," Dave suggested. I shut off the phone and removed the battery. "Lucy's arraignment is Monday?" Beverly asked. "Yeah, the DA hopes they'll hold her without bail, but I'm not sure, based on what Holly told me." "You can stay here as long as you need," Dave offered. "I've got a job in a week, but you're welcome to stick around." "Thanks. I'm planning on taking 2 weeks off, so hopefully things will be settled by then." "If you need anything, just ask," Dave reassured me. Dave smiled at Beverly and said, "I'm sure she'll keep you busy, but you're our guest. Your folks always treated us well, so just relax and enjoy the country air." Beverly stood up, yawning. "I've got to get up soon and make breakfast. Hope you like omelets and hash browns," she said, glancing at me. "Sounds perfect," I replied. She waved goodnight and went upstairs. After her door closed, Dave and I stepped outside to smoke. "What's her story?" I asked. "I thought she'd be married with kids by now." "She never found anyone she cared for. Dated a few guys, but none of them measured up." "Measured up to what?" I asked. Dave looked at me seriously. She's always had a crush on you." "Really?" I said, surprised. "Yep, the only reason she never told you was because of Lucy." "Are you serious?" "As a heart attack. I've even heard her call your name in her sleep." "That's a little too much info," I said, feeling awkward. Dave just smirked. "It is what it is." "When did she turn into a babe?" I asked, shaking my head. "She's always been pretty. You just had blinders on with Lucy." "Yeah, I guess I did," I said quietly. "Look, if you two get together, that's fine by me. Just don't break her heart, okay? She's had feelings for you for a long time." "I'm done with Lucy," I reassured him. "Good. Just don't lead her on," he added. We finished our smokes and Dave headed to bed. I followed shortly after and fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. I woke up to Beverly yelling, "Rise and shine." It was 8:30. After my morning routine and a quick shower, I got dressed, pulling off my wedding ring and leaving it on the dresser. When I came downstairs, Beverly was making breakfast in a short t-shirt and cut-off shorts, her hair pulled back. She looked amazing, and I wondered why I hadn't noticed before. "Smells great," I said. She smiled. "Coffee's ready. Want butter pecan creamer?" "Absolutely." "Help yourself. Just save some for us," she said with a wink. I poured a cup and joined Dave, who was reading the paper. "Morning," I said. "Morning," he replied, still focused on the news. "There's an article about a lawyer getting arrested. Could be connected to your case." I glanced at the article, but it didn't offer many details, so I handed it back. By then, Beverly brought breakfast to the table. "This is amazing," I said after a bite. "Glad you like it," she smiled. After breakfast, Dave stood up. "I'm heading into town for a bit. If you need to call the DA, use the house phone." "Thanks," I said. Beverly handed him a list and he left. I turned to her. "Need help with the dishes?" "Not necessary, but I'd appreciate it," she replied with a grin. I helped Beverly clear the table and she tossed me a towel while she washed the dishes. I see you're not wearing your ring. Are you really going to divorce her? She asked. Yeah, I told her I wouldn't tolerate cheating, and I meant it, I said firmly. Good, she replied with a slight smile. Glad to see you still have some backbone. So, what's your story? How are things with you? I asked. She shrugged. Okay, I guess. Anyone special in your life? I asked, curious. There was, but he was taken. Besides, I had to take care of my parents, she said, looking a bit sad. Yeah, I heard, I said sympathetically. I worked as a waitress to help out after Dad died, and when Mom got too sick, I stayed home full-time to take care of her, she explained. I'm sorry. Don't be, I don't regret it. I just hope someone will be there for me when I'm that age, she said with a soft smile. So, what happened after your mom passed? I asked. Had to sell the house to cover the expenses. Dave let me have what was left, and I've been living here since. He offered to send me to college, but I turned him down, she added. Why? I asked, surprised. I want to make it on my own. I'm working at McDonald's and taking business courses at night, she said proudly. Good for you. Dave's still talking about starting his own fabrication business. He wants me to handle the accounting, she said. Still on about that, huh? I laughed. Yeah, he does custom work for folks around here and makes good money. His dream is to work full-time from his shop. Maybe he'll show me the shop while I'm here, I said. That would be nice, she replied. We fell quiet, and I found myself really admiring her for the first time. She noticed and raised an eyebrow. What are you staring at? She asked. I think I'm looking at the most beautiful woman I've ever met, I told her. She blushed and looked down. Stop teasing me. I'm not. I admire everything you've done. Taking care of your parents, working your way through school. I just wish I'd noticed it sooner. Well, you were blinded by Lucy, she said, smiling. Yeah, you're right, I agreed. With the dishes done, Beverly dried her hands and turned to me, her expression firm. She used you, you know, she said bluntly. I sighed. I think you're right. I saw through her years ago, she continued, shaking her head. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, curious. You wouldn't have believed me. She had you wrapped around her finger, Bev said with a hint of frustration. All I wanted was to keep her happy, I said quietly, looking down. And look where that got you, she said, her voice rising. She got her degree, a new car, and everything else on your dime. Then, when she didn't need you anymore, she traded you in. I'm glad she's in jail because I'd tear her apart if she were here. I believe you would, I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. Bev crossed her arms and stared at me intently. I need to know one thing. What's that? I asked. Are you going to fall for her tears and take her back? I shook my head firmly. No, that's not happening. Good, she said, visibly relieved. Just remember that. Without warning, Beverly pulled off her t-shirt and tossed it aside, revealing herself to me for the first time. She quickly undressed, walked over, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me passionately. We made love in the kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the window. I love you, Stan Shipman. I've always loved you. Don't forget that, she whispered afterward, her voice tender. I love you too, Beverly, I replied, still breathless. I want to stay like this forever. That sounds nice, she smiled, but I doubt my brother would appreciate it. She laughed, and I kissed her deeply again. Then it suddenly hit me. I pulled back, concerned. I just realized I didn't use protection. Don't worry, I'm on the pill, she reassured me with a smile. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if you got me pregnant. I'd love to have your kids. I'll hold you to that, I said, relieved. We should clean up before Dave gets back, she said, standing up and stretching. I need to prepare the meat for tonight. Why don't you shower first? Okay, I'll be up in a bit. What's the meat for? I asked. We barbecue on Sundays, weather permitting. You like venison, right? She grinned. Yeah, but it's been years since I had any, I said, smiling back. Good. I shot at myself with Dave's .50 caliber flintlock and dressed it in the field, she said proudly. You're quite the woman. I'm impressed, I laughed. I knew Dave's flintlock had to be at least 49 inches long. Did you load it yourself? I asked, intrigued. Of course. Patched round ball with 100 grains of double F powder. I even molded the bullet, she said with a wink. Damn! Do you like fishing too? I asked, genuinely curious. I love fishing. I bait my own hooks and clean my own fish, she replied, clearly proud of her skills. Is there anything you haven't done? I asked sarcastically. I haven't rebuilt the transmission in Dave's truck yet, but I did help him rebuild the engine, she laughed. I'm definitely in love, I said, kissing her. She kissed me back and said, Now hurry up and shower. I'll be up in a bit. I headed upstairs and jumped in the shower. A few minutes later, Beverly joined me. Just wait until tonight when we go to bed, she teased. By the way, you're sleeping with me from now on. My bed's bigger than yours. Won't Dave mind? I asked, unsure. Nope, we're both consenting adults, she winked. After our shower, we got dressed and went back downstairs. I need to call the DA to let her know where I am, I said. Beverly pointed to a wireless phone. Use that one. I picked it up, nearly forgetting it was long distance. Linda answered after 2 rings. Linda Calloway, she said. Linda, this is Stan Shipman. I'm calling to update you on my whereabouts. Stan, I was worried. You're calling long distance. Where are you? She asked. I'm with an old family friend and turned off my cell for safety, I explained. Got it. I'll keep you updated. The feds are investigating the firm your wife works for. I also contacted a top divorce lawyer in the area for you. I hope that's okay. No problem. I appreciate it, I replied. She's expecting to hear from you tomorrow. If anyone can help, it's her, Linda said. Thanks, I'll do that, I said, jotting down the information. Linda provided details and promised to update me on the arraignment before we ended the call. By the time I hung up, Dave was back and I helped him carry in the groceries. I called your parents, he said. They were worried. I told them you're staying with us. Thanks, I appreciate that, I replied. That evening, we barbecued the venison and enjoyed dinner outside on the deck. Afterward, we all helped clean up. Dave and I grabbed a beer and stepped out for a smoke while Beverly finished in the kitchen. So, are you going to be sleeping in her room? Dave asked, grinning. I felt uncomfortable discussing it, given that Bev was his sister. Yeah, I think so, I replied awkwardly. Is this going to be permanent? Dave's tone turned serious. I think so, I said confidently. I just need to finalize my divorce. Do you love her? Dave asked, looking me in the eye. Yeah, I do, I answered without hesitation. Good. It's about time you got your head straight, he said, smiling and slapping my shoulder. Bev's a big girl. She can make her own decisions. I just don't want to see her get hurt. I'd never hurt her, I promised. Glad to hear that. Welcome to the family, Dave said, extending his hand. I shook it, and we shared a manly bear hug. Just don't keep me up all night, okay? Dave laughed. I chuckled and nodded. I'll do my best. That night, after Bev and I made love, I held her close, thinking about our future. I hadn't felt this content in a long time. What are you thinking? She asked softly, her head on my chest. The future, I said. Oh? She lifted her head to look at me. Yeah. What do you want out of life? Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I asked. I'm not one to chase a career, she said thoughtfully. I just want a loving husband and a family. That's enough for me. What about your classes? I asked, curious. They're more for Dave. He'll need help with his business, she explained. And what do you want? I'm like you, I said. I just want a faithful wife and a family. I thought I had that with Lucy, but it didn't work out. She smiled. And your job? I love it, I said. But sometimes I'm gone for a couple of weeks. Can you handle that? She laughed. My brother's a welder, remember? I know what to expect. As long as you come home to me, I'm fine. I looked at her, feeling peace I hadn't felt in ages. I wish I'd met you before, Lucy. Me too, she said. But we'll get through this together. We're a team. I'll always be here for you, she added warmly. I love you, I said, kissing her. I love you more, she whispered, holding me tight. That night, I fell asleep feeling truly loved. The next morning, Beverly was up early. After making breakfast, she kissed me before heading to work, reminding me she had class after her shift. I'll be home by 9:30. You guys fend for yourselves, she said, grinning. I love you. I love you too, I replied, touched. After she left, Dave came down and joked, No kiss for me? Beverly laughed, gave him a quick peck, and said, Stay out of trouble, as she walked out. I glanced at the clock. I need to call that divorce lawyer. Dave motioned to the phone, so I dialed. Law Office of Bernice Goodwin, a friendly voice answered. I introduced myself and explained that Bernice was expecting my call. Hold on a moment, she said. Soon another voice came on. Bernice Goodwin, how can I help? This is Stan Shipman. Linda Calloway gave me your number. Ah, yes. I've been expecting your call. Normally I like in-person meetings, but I understand this time is different, she said. That's fine, I replied. We can handle most of it online. Tell me everything, she instructed. I explained the situation, and she listened carefully. What are your expectations? She asked. I want no alimony and my fair share of the assets, I said. We can do that, she replied. Your wife's legal trouble will help your case. Do you own property? No, we rent, I answered. Do you want to pursue action against Marie and Jake? I'd recommend suing for emotional distress, not alienation of affection. It's more effective, she advised. Do what you think is best, I said. I'll get started. Do you have an email? I gave her my information, and she said, I'll send documents, including a contract to sign and a checklist. You'll also need to pay a retainer. Can you do that today? Yes, I agreed. Great. Once everything is ready, I'll have the papers served. Any questions? No questions, I replied. Her assistant took my credit card info for the retainer. After hanging up, I checked my email and found 2 documents from Bernice. I signed the contract, sent it back with a receipt, and read through the advice on protecting my finances. Using online banking, I opened a new account, transferring half of our savings and checking into it. I paid off and canceled Lucy's card, but kept mine open for the retainer payment. By early afternoon, I had finished everything. Dave took me to his shop where he was working on a trailer for a local farmer. I helped out, finding it relaxing to stay busy. Around 3 o'clock, we got a call. Dave answered and handed me the phone. It's your lawyer, he said. This is Stan, I said. Stan, it's Linda Calloway. Bad news. The judge set minimal bail and let them go, Linda said, sounding tense. How's that possible? I asked, feeling my stomach drop. Probably on their payroll. The protection order's in place, but it's only as good as the paper it's on. Stay put for now. The feds are watching them, but I can't guarantee your safety, she explained. Great. So what now? Stay where you are. I'll handle things from here. Call if you need anything, she said. All right, I replied, feeling uneasy. After hanging up, I told Dave. The judge let them go. Damn, you should call your folks, Dave suggested. I agreed and dialed my parents. My dad answered on the second ring. Dad, it's Stan, I said, trying to stay calm. How are you holding up? He asked, clearly worried. I'm okay, but I wanted to let you know the judge let Lucy and her friends out. Be on guard. They might try to find me, I warned. Don't worry, we won't say anything. You still down at John Harrison's place? He asked. I realized he already knew where I was, and it hit me. Lucy and her friends were likely with him now. I decided to play along. No, I'm about 50 miles south of there in a motel, I lied. Okay, as long as you're safe, my dad said, sounding strained. I'll be leaving here tomorrow, heading east, I added, continuing the ruse. Just let me know where you end up, he replied. Can I talk to Mom? I asked, sensing something was off. She's in the bathroom, he said, his voice shaky. I thought I heard background noise, raising my suspicions. All right, tell her I love her, I said. I will. Love you, son, he said, and we ended the call. I immediately called Linda. I think Lucy and her friends are at my parents' house, I told her, feeling anxious. I'll send federal agents over right now. Stay put, she said firmly. After the call, I told Dave, I think they're at my parents' place looking for me. Do you think they'll believe your story? Dave asked. I hope so, at least for a while. I should probably find somewhere else to hide, I said, pacing. No, you're staying here. Let me clean up and I'll talk to the sheriff. Don't move, Dave said, sounding determined. I nodded, but I wasn't sure how much time we had before Lucy and her friends figured out the truth. A couple of hours after Dave left for town, Linda called back, her voice tense. Stan, you were right. Lucy, Marie, Jake, and some thugs went to your parents' house after the hearing. They tied them up, but your folks didn't reveal your location. We have an APB out for them, and one of their guys is in custody, but he's not talking. Do you know where they're headed? I asked, feeling uneasy. No, but they didn't buy your story, she said grimly. Here, talk to your dad. My father's voice came through, shaky but relieved. Stan, they didn't fall for it, but we're okay. I think Lucy and her crew are heading your way. What makes you think that? I asked, my heart racing. I overheard Lucy talking, he said. You'd better warn Linda. I will, Dad. Be safe, I replied, and Linda came back on the line. Where exactly are you? She asked. I gave her my location and asked if Lucy could find me. She knows, Linda said. Stay put. We'll send someone fast. I hung up and headed back to the house, but as I left the shop, I heard Jake's voice. Well, thought you could outsmart us, huh? He sneered, weapon in hand. Behind him, Marie and Lucy stood by an SUV, smug. Jake waved the weapon at me. Move! I had no choice but to get in the SUV. Lucy slid in beside me, smirking. This won't end well for you, I warned. No matter, she said coldly. It'll be too late for you. They drove me to a creek bed, and Jake ordered me out. A thug tied my hands behind my back and forced me to my knees. Jake pulled out a longsword and stood over me. "Make your peace," he said, raising the sword. I closed my eyes and prayed. Suddenly, a rifle shot rang out. Jake dropped dead, a bullet in his forehead. Another shot struck the thug holding me. Marie tried to grab Jake's weapon, but a third shot struck her shoulder. Lucy cowered behind Jake's body. I heard a four-wheeler approach. Beverly arrived, blonde hair flowing and rifle in hand. She cut me loose, then marched over to Lucy, striking her with the back of her rifle. "Don't you ever touch my man again, or I'll blow your head off," Beverly shouted. Lucy, bleeding and trembling, nodded in fear. Beverly then slammed the rifle back into Lucy's kneecap, and Lucy screamed in agony as her bone cracked. We heard sirens in the distance as Beverly calmly reached for a flare weapon from the four-wheeler. She aimed it at the sky and fired, signaling the authorities. As the sirens grew louder, flashing lights appeared on the horizon, heading our way. Beverly approached me, her expression softening as she asked, "Are you okay, sweetie?" "I am now," I replied, still in shock from what had happened. "You saved my life, Bev. I can never repay you." "Trust me," she said with a warm smile. "You've got the rest of your life to make it up to me." Soon the area was filled with police cars. Dave pulled up in his truck and hurried over to check on us. "You okay?" Dave asked, concern on his face. "I am now, thanks to Bev. She saved my life," I said, deeply grateful. The sheriff and his deputies took control of the scene. They called for an ambulance for Marie, who was still screaming in pain, and a coroner for Jake's body. Lucy was handcuffed and taken away, but not before shooting me a hateful look. "She eliminated Jake and Ronnie," Marie cried, tears streaming as paramedics tended to her. The sheriff remained calm. "Nope," he said. "This is Dave's property. And under the castle doctrine, Miss Brolin was within her rights to protect Mr. Shipman's life. You're lucky she didn't eliminate you too." As deputies loaded Lucy and Marie into separate squad cars, the sheriff told me, "They're both being charged with attempted liquidation and conspiracy. With the evidence we've gathered and your testimony, it's a sealed case." After the police collected the evidence and the bodies were removed, Beverly and I got back on the four-wheeler and rode home, with Dave following in his truck, relieved but silent. As we parked, I turned to Beverly. "I thought you had classes today," I said, still in awe. She grinned. "Dave came by McDonald's and told me what was going on. I clocked out, came home, and followed the tire tracks to where you were. I got into the deer stand and, well, you know the rest." "I owe you everything, Bev," I said, full of emotion. "You don't owe me a thing. You're alive, and that's all I care about," she said, hugging me tightly. Inside, I called Linda to tell her what happened. She was relieved I was safe. "Now we've got them where we want them," Linda said confidently. "The firm is going down hard." "I hope so," I replied. I then called my parents, who were equally relieved that everything turned out okay. That night, after things settled down, I thanked Beverly repeatedly for saving my life. Marie eventually recovered, and she and Lucy stood trial for attempted liquidation and conspiracy. They were found guilty on multiple charges, including my attack and illegal detention. Both received life sentences and would never be free again. I couldn't have been happier. Beatrice finalized the divorce, and thanks to Lucy's convictions, she got nothing. Beatrice also secured a hefty settlement from Marie and Jake's estate. By the end, I was rolling in money. Sure, Bernice got a share, but I was very happy with my cut. The firm settled for a large sum as its partners faced federal charges, including racketeering and suspicious end-of-lifes. Eventually, the firm shut down, and the partners ended up in prison for life. It all unfolded in about 6 months, leaving Beverly and me with more than enough to live on for years. I bought a nice ring and proposed properly on one knee. She squealed and kissed me all over. A month later, we got married and spent a week in Las Vegas. When we returned, we sat Dave down and proposed forming DNS Welding and Custom Fabrications. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Hell yeah," I said. Beverly pulled out a spreadsheet and showed it to me. It was the business plan she had been working on. After reviewing it carefully, I nodded in approval. "You know, I think this could work," I said, impressed. "Oh, I almost forgot," I added, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a set of keys. "You know that lot on the south side?" "Yeah, what about it?" she asked, curious. "Did you see the new double wide on it?" I asked with a grin. "Yeah, we thought you sold it," she replied. "Nope," I said, smiling. "It's your wedding gift from me and your parents. The lot and home are in your name now. Your dad and I moved all your stuff from your apartment, minus anything with Lucy's picture on it." Beverly looked stunned. "Wow, I don't know what to say." I could afford to build a custom home, but the double wide was nice and sturdy. I wasn't about to turn down such a generous gift, especially knowing it must have cost over $150,000. Just say thanks, partner, I said, offering my hand. Beverly smiled and shook my hand before pulling me into a bear hug. You okay with us living down there? Beverly asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I'd hate for you to be alone. I'll be fine, I reassured her. I might finally get a decent night's sleep without hearing you two all night. We all laughed and celebrated. Later, I called my parents to thank them for the incredible gift. That night, Beverly and I christened the master bedroom of our new home. As we lay in each other's arms, I felt confident that things would turn out well. Of course, with money comes a lot of friends, and some have serious prison connections. Lucy and Marie, meanwhile, weren't so lucky. Behind bars, they had a rough time, cleaning toilets with toothbrushes and doing favors for inmates with special preferences. I guess their horizons just got a lot wider. Growing up, I was surrounded by the whispers of betrayal and heartbreak. My father's indiscretions weren't just family secrets. They were open wounds in our household. His frequent absences, unexplained late nights, and the smell of cheap perfume on his shirts were a stark contrast to my mother's unwavering devotion. I often wondered why she stayed, why she endured the humiliation. As a child, I believed in the sanctity of love, thinking it was something magical that could weather any storm. But the cracks in their marriage taught me otherwise. They revealed a harsh reality where trust was fragile and love could be weaponized. I promised myself my life would be different. When I met Jody in high school, I saw in her what I hoped for: kindness, loyalty, and a sense of shared purpose. We built our relationship on what I thought was a foundation of mutual respect and transparency. From the day we exchanged vows, I envisioned a future free of the chaos and pain I grew up with. I was determined to provide her with the stability my parents never had. Yet, even the strongest foundation can be undermined, and as I would soon learn, illusions of security are no match for the unpredictable storms of life. The night my wife, Jody, decided to spend it in the company of another man wasn't just another evening. It marked the end of an era in my life. She assumed I would take it in stride, that her pursuit of a fleeting thrill wouldn't matter to me. Perhaps she was correct about her excitement, but she miscalculated how deeply it would cut. What she saw as a harmless adventure, I saw as a betrayal that unraveled the very fabric of our marriage. I was at my desk, sipping coffee, thinking about the morning with Jody. We met in high school and mostly dated each other, though we briefly dated other people during disagreements, always coming back to one another. We gave each other our pureness before prom and married 9 months after graduation. As far as I knew, I was her only partner. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, so I hesitated. I hate scam calls, especially the ones from the IRS. But this time it was Jody's office number. "Hi, honey," I answered. A man's voice responded, sharp and formal. "This isn't your wife, Mr. Taylor." I blinked, confused. "That's me, John Richard Taylor III, but I go by Trey." The man introduced himself. "I'm Michael Hamilton, a colleague of Jody's. I need you to meet me this afternoon." His tone didn't explain much beyond that. I felt a sudden rush of concern. "Is she okay?" "She was fine when I last saw her," Michael replied. "But I have some information about her that I think you should know. Can you meet me at noon?" He wouldn't explain over the phone. I agreed reluctantly, still unsure if this was some kind of joke. At noon, I met Michael outside Spike's restaurant. He suggested we walk to avoid being overheard, so we headed toward Central Park. "Your wife has been spending a lot of time with a man named Stan Morrison at work," he started. "They go to lunch together every day, and today they were openly discussing their plans for tomorrow night. Dinner at the Hilton, followed by dancing, and then spending the night together." My stomach sank. "Are you telling me they're sleeping together?" "Yes," Michael confirmed. "He's already made reservations, and your wife is out shopping for clothes for the date." I felt numb. How do they think this will work? "She thinks you love her enough to let her experience another man," he said. "She believes it won't affect your marriage." I stopped walking, trying to process everything. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael's expression hardened. "I was married for 9 years. My wife had an affair and the legal system screwed me over. Now, I'm trying to help someone avoid my situation. We talked for a while longer before he left. I was left thinking about my marriage and what the future held. If Michael was telling the truth, my marriage was over. It scared me how easily I could consider that possibility based on a brief conversation with a stranger. I thought back to my childhood and the pain my mother endured with my father. He was a heavy drinker and womanizer, having multiple affairs and openly mocking her. When I asked why she put up with it, she simply said, "I love him." One day, when I was about 11, my dad took me to his girlfriend's house. I ended up walking home after getting bored of petting her dog. When I told my mom where I had been, she didn't confront him, but 2 days later he spanked me with a belt for breaking a plate. Looking back, I realized it was because I had snitched on him. After seeing how my mother suffered, I couldn't imagine condoning Jody having an affair. Even thinking about it made me sick. Call me whatever you want, but I wasn't going to live through what my mother did. Eventually she left my father, and life got better for both of us. She remarried and is happy now. Jody and I live in a house owned by my mother and stepfather, so I was stuck wondering, confront her or ignore it? Wait and see? As a salesman, I knew I had to be proactive, not wait for things to come to me. But in this case, if Michael was right, I didn't know Jody at all. She knew how I felt about infidelity, so I decided to take action. But how do you act when you don't even know if the situation is real? I planned out every possible scenario. I imagined the worst-case outcome and asked myself what I could live with. If I couldn't accept the worst, I would have to make another choice. I made up my mind. First, I found a private investigator. After a quick meeting and spending a lot of money, we had a plan in place. Now I had to figure out how to act when I got home. When I arrived, Jody was there. She kissed and hugged me like she always did, and I had to decide how to respond. I could act normal, which would allow her plans to proceed, or I could drop a hint about what I'd learned. But if I did that, she might just deny everything and wait for things to blow over. I wasn't going to live with that doubt. On the other hand, if I acted suspicious, she might abandon her plan. I decided to act normal. We had dinner, and I fried the pork chops like usual. Acting normal was harder than I expected, but either she was a great actress or, as Michael said, she was so confident that she didn't even try to hide anything. Around 11 p.m., I went upstairs to get ready for bed. Jody was already asleep. I showered, then lay awake, unable to sleep. At 6 a.m., she got up, dressed, and went downstairs. A few minutes later, I did the same, only to find she was already gone. We rarely left the house without kissing each other goodbye, but today was different. It was Friday, usually a good day for RV sales, but I decided to take the day off. I called my boss, then contacted the dealership's attorney to ask for a divorce lawyer recommendation. He referred me to his wife, but warned me she didn't take cases from husbands who cheated. After he called her, I met with the lawyer. I explained my conversation with Michael Hamilton. She asked why I'd hired an investigator based on an unverified story from a stranger. I told her about my parents' marriage and my personal stance against infidelity. She suggested I wait and confirm Hamilton's story, adding that if Jody was as confident as he said, then she'd have nothing to lose by having an affair. I told her that I wouldn't tolerate any affair, big or small, and if Jody went through with her plan, I wanted her served by Monday. If Hamilton's lying, I'll have to eat crow, I said. But if he's telling the truth, I'll be ready. She assured me the paperwork would be ready if needed. By 1 p.m., I was back at work trying to sell a van to an elderly couple. At first, I was doubtful about selling a 45-foot motorhome to them, but after spending time with them, I realized they were in great shape and had a lively, loving relationship. I envied their energy and bond, hoping Jody and I could be like them one day. They picked out their van, and we took it for a test drive. Mr. Jacobson drove confidently, and I could barely focus on the sale, enjoying their conversation. It made me think of how I wanted my own marriage to turn out. I decided to give them a tray discount, taking a bit from my commission. They bought the van, smiling as they left. It was time to head home. I checked in with my investigator and was reassured everything was set. At 5:30 p.m., I pulled into the garage. Jody's car was in its spot, and the house was quiet, no dinner cooking. I stayed calm, placed the package from the investigator on the mantel, and sat down to wait. At 5:45, Jody came downstairs, looking stunning in the outfit Michael had described. She had her overnight bag in hand. "Wow, you look gorgeous. What's the occasion?" I asked, trying to hide the knot forming in my stomach. "One of the guys at work has been asking me out, and I thought it'd be fun," she replied casually. "What do you mean, go out with him? Like a date?" I pressed, the confusion creeping into my voice. "Yes," she said, not missing a beat. "We thought since you're the only man I've ever been with, I'd like to sleep with someone else. We're going to dinner, then dancing, and spending the night at a hotel. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't believe how calm she was. You can't be serious. You're really spending the night with another man? I'm not agreeing to that. And who's this we are talking about? I demanded, struggling to make sense of it. It's no big deal, she said dismissively. Just one night of fun. I'll be back tomorrow, and it'll be like nothing happened. I might even pick up a few tricks you might like. There's no way I'm letting you go out tonight with someone else, I said firmly, my voice tight with anger. Don't be ridiculous, she shot back. I'm serious, Jody. If you go, our marriage is over, I said, each word heavy with finality. Just then, we heard a car honk from outside. That's him, she said, heading toward the door. I moved quickly, blocking her path. Please, don't do this, I said, my voice pleading as I reached out. I have to go, she replied, stepping around me and kissing me on the cheek. I'll be home by noon tomorrow, and everything will be fine, she said, already heading for the door. If you leave, you won't have anywhere to come back to, I warned, my heart sinking with the words. Now you're being really stupid, she said, rolling her eyes. Enjoy your night thinking about how much fun I'm having. We'll talk tomorrow. Good night. She kissed me and left. I didn't watch her get into the car. I walked over to the fireplace, turned off the recorder, and carried the box of trash bags upstairs. It took me nearly 2 hours to remove every trace of her. I emptied her closet and bathroom vanity, even taking her birth certificate, high school diploma, and social security card from the safe. I set everything by the garage door and gathered up her family photo albums, school awards, and the Remington bronze statue from her grandfather. I cleared out all her magnets from the fridge, stuffed everything in her car, rolled it out of the garage, and parked it on the street, leaving the keys on the driver's seat. I climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned for hours. Finally, I got up, made coffee, and tried watching a Hogan's Heroes marathon, but it didn't help. For the next 2 days, I couldn't sleep at all. I felt like a zombie. By 11 a.m. on the third day, I'd finished a sale with the Jacobsons, wrapping up all the paperwork. I was home by 11:45, and the locksmith had already delivered a new set of keys. The investigator was there too, handing over the video footage he'd recorded over the past 18 hours. At 12:30, I was sitting in front of the TV, watching the tapes when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to find Jody standing there. Hey, my key doesn't work, and why is my car outside? She asked. I blocked the door. Your key doesn't work because you don't live here anymore, and your car's outside because I don't want it in my garage. What are you talking about? This is my house now, she demanded, trying to push past me. I said, I told you last night, if you got in that man's car, you wouldn't have a place to come back to. All your stuff's in your car. You can't be serious, she said, clearly shocked. It was just, she started, but I didn't let her finish. I slammed the door in her face. She pounded on the door, so I opened it again. If you don't stop banging, I'll call the police and have you arrested, I threatened, though I knew I probably couldn't do that. But I had nothing left to lose. You can't do that! This is my house! She yelled. This house belongs to my mother and stepfather, I replied, and they've decided you don't live here anymore. Now leave! She stood there, speechless, and I slammed the door in her face again. I went back to watching the tapes, but the anger inside me kept building. After a while, I glanced out the window and saw Jody sitting in her car. I went to the kitchen for water, but poured myself a gin and tonic instead, my frustration growing. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't just a ring. It was constant, relentless. I was ready to snap. I imagined tearing into her and feeding the pieces to the dogs. I opened the door, and there stood her sister Judy, still pressing the doorbell. Jody's crying at my house. I want to know why, she said. I didn't care. Screw it, I thought, and slammed the door in her face. But the bell rang again, and this time I yanked the door open and slammed her hand against it, causing her to nearly lose her balance. Ring that bell one more time, and I'll break your fingers one at a time, I warned. Judy pushed against the door, holding it open. Talk to me, please. I stood there for a moment before slowly opening the door and letting her in. She looked at me. I thought you loved Jody. I can't believe you kicked her out over a stupid disagreement. Stupid disagreement? I scoffed. She told me you had a fight over a walk and that you kicked her out. Judy sighed. Well, that part's true. She wanted to go out and I didn't. But she didn't tell you she wanted to go out with a guy from work, did she? I shook my head. Did she tell you they were planning dinner, dancing, and then a hotel room? I didn't wait for an answer, just played the audio tape I'd made the night before. Judy listened, her face falling. I had no idea, she said, shaking her head. Yeah, neither did I replied flatly. So what are you going to do? She asked softly. Divorce her? She added, almost as an afterthought. No, I said bitterly. This marriage is over. Judy nodded, then stood up. I walked her to the door. She hesitated, looking at me, and I opened it, escorting her out. The rest of the evening and all of Sunday, I did nothing but eat grilled cheese sandwiches and drink gin and tonics. Self-pity had taken over. Then there was another knock at the door, Judy again. You said if I rang the bell one more time, you'd break my fingers, so I knocked, she said. I've been talking to Jody all day. What you told me is true. I let her in, motioning for her to sit down. So what's the deal? She says nothing happened, I asked. Judy nodded. She admitted it was a disaster. They went to the hotel, drank too much, passed out. She woke up, realized what she was doing, and insisted he take her home. Well, that's a story, I muttered, still not buying it. You believe her, don't you? Judy asked. I believe she and this guy spent days, maybe weeks, planning it. They spent time together, talked, grew close. He knows more about my marriage than I do. They planned to cheat, and it doesn't matter if nothing happened. That's a betrayal. Judy was silent. You don't believe her, do you? She asked. No, I replied firmly. Even if nothing happened, you're not going to forgive her? She pressed. Not in this lifetime, I said. We reached the door and she paused. When this is over, can we still be friends? I took a deep breath. Jody and I are getting a divorce. If she fights it, it'll get ugly. By the time it's over, you probably won't want to be friends with me anymore. She smiled faintly. I see. Well, I think I'll miss you. She placed a hand on my cheek and kissed my other cheek softly, then left, closing the door behind her. Since Saturday, my phone had been off most of the time. Jody tried reaching me repeatedly, but eventually gave up. I managed to speak to her father, who tried to convince me that since nothing physical had happened with Stan, it wasn't a big deal and I should move on. I explained it to him the same way I had to Judy. After the call, he realized divorce was inevitable and sighed before hanging up. On Monday, I called my attorney and told her about the weekend's events. I also instructed her to serve Jody with a summons that day. My attorney assured me it would be done by the end of the day. I spent the rest of the day not remembering much. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. I saw it was Jody's office number and decided to answer. Hello? I said. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. This is Michael Hamilton. I thought you might want to know that there was some excitement here today, he said. Really? I asked, curious. Yes. Your wife was served with a summons, and after reading the papers, she fainted. An ambulance took her to the hospital. When the paramedics left, Stan Morrison picked up the papers, looked them over, and almost fainted too. As serious as the situation was, part of me found it darkly amusing, but I had no sympathy for either of them. I'll keep you posted on any developments, Michael said. Please do, I replied before hanging up. A moment later, my phone rang again. It was Judy. Hello? I answered. Jody's in the hospital, she said. So? I replied coldly. I just thought you might want to know. I didn't ask, I added more sharply than I intended. Are you really that heartless? Judy asked. My coldness comes from your sister, I answered. I warned you this would go south. This is just round one. The following weeks played out predictably. Jody tried to talk to me countless times, but I ignored her. Her parents urged me to listen, but I refused. My mother spent a lot of time trying to comfort me, but I insisted I was fine, though she didn't believe it. Michael Hamilton called daily, and I enjoyed his calls. He was the only one who knew what was going on with Morrison. Jody came to work but just sat at her desk, only meeting with her lawyer. She and Morrison barely spoke, at least not in front of anyone. Me? I was just stalling. Our lawyers set up a meeting. Jody, her lawyer, my lawyer, and me. It was the first time I'd seen her since I kicked her out. She looked thinner and worn out, and I was surprised to see Judy there. Jody's lawyer asked if everything was okay. Are you sure you want to be here? I asked Judy. I'm here for Jody, she replied. That's not what I asked, I said, staring at her. But fine, stay. Jody was already sitting at the table, so we all took our seats. Her lawyer started. Mrs. Taylor categorically denies the infidelity and asks for the divorce petition to be dismissed so they can work on saving the marriage. She's willing to go to counseling. My lawyer and I exchanged a glance before he spoke. If there was no infidelity, could Mrs. Taylor explain her actions that night? We all looked at Jody. "I'll be happy to," she said calmly. "A gentleman friend picked me up." "Does he have a name?" my lawyer asked. "Of course, but his name isn't important. Nothing bad happened, so no need to involve him." She repeated what Judy had told me. Champagne, dinner, more champagne, getting too drunk to have fun, passing out, and then coming home to be kicked out. "Poor misunderstanding," she sighed. "I made a mistake. I love my husband, and I want him to forgive me." I looked at Judy, who nodded in agreement. My lawyer, who had been quiet until now, asked, "Okay, let's assume everything you said is true, and no sex occurred. Was there any touching? Anything that wouldn't pass the husband test?" "Absolutely not," Jody insisted. Judy nodded. My lawyer glanced at me, and I glanced back. I picked up the remote, pressed play, and a screen dropped down from the ceiling, showing Jody walking to Stan Morrison's car in our driveway. He opened the door for her, and they kissed, long and passionately. Then they got in and drove off. I paused the video. "Lie number 1, I said, looking around the room. Everyone sat up straighter. Jody turned pale, and Judy just stared at her sister. On Thursday, after Michael Hamilton's call, I spoke with my investigator. We planned to videotape Jody's every move on Friday night, starting when Stan Morrison arrived at our house. Thanks to Hamilton, we knew the location of their date and the room number they had booked. My investigator was able to get access to their suite before check-in. "You said there was no inappropriate touching, right?" I asked Jody. "Yes," she replied, though unsure. I pressed play. The video showed Jody and Morrison at the Hilton's restaurant, where his hand was on her rear. "Lie number 2, I said. Jody looked around. Her lawyer was reading the divorce petition, and Judy was inspecting her nails. The video continued. Jody and Morrison ordered champagne, finished it, and rushed to the elevator. I had paid my investigator $1,000 to get into their suite before they checked in. 4 minutes after entering, Jody was already entertaining Morrison. Then, Jody screamed and ran out, followed by Judy. I paused the video. "Seems my client forgot some details," said Jody's lawyer, quickly packing up and leaving with the sisters. Later, I returned to the dealership, and Judy approached my booth. She paused for a moment before asking, "May I sit down?" "Sure," I replied, motioning to the chair across from me. We both sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, Judy broke the quiet. "You knew, didn't you?" "Knew what?" I asked, confused. "When I came to your house that Saturday," she continued, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "You already knew they were sleeping together." I sighed, a weight settling in. "Yes," I admitted. "I watched the video before you arrived." Judy's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I pressed on. "And they weren't just fooling around, Judy. They were doing it. She's my wife, and she let it happen." A long pause followed, then she asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought she'd admit it herself," I said, the words coming out heavy. "I thought she'd agree to a divorce. If she had, I would have spared you and your family the details. I've always liked your parents." The room fell quiet again, the tension thick. My phone rang, breaking the silence. I answered immediately. "This is Michael Hamilton," came the voice on the other end. "Just so you know, your wife called yesterday and quit. She didn't even clear her desk." "Thanks," I said, my voice flat. "Let me know if you hear anything else." I hung up without another word. Judy opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the office loudspeaker. "Trey, you have a call on line 6. I nodded to Judy before stepping away to take the call. It lasted about 15 minutes, during which Judy remained still, her gaze distant. When I returned, she looked at me with a certain finality. "She's gone, Trey." "What do you mean gone?" I asked. "She packed up and left. Probably moved into her own place," Judy said quietly. "I don't think so," Judy added. "She asked me to tell your parents she was sorry for disappointing them." "It wasn't just your parents she disappointed," I replied. "Yeah, we know," she said softly. Judy stood up, glanced at me, and walked out. Later that night, I watched the full video again. My lawyer still had the earlier copy, but I had my own. Watching it made me numb. There was no romance, no love. He didn't care about her feelings. The pain and anger swirled in me. Part of me wanted to scream in agony. Another part wanted revenge. My thoughts were a mess. I fell asleep in the chair, my mind swirling with thoughts of the betrayal. Over the following weeks, my lawyer tried to arrange another meeting with Jody and her lawyer, but he couldn't get in touch with her. A month passed, then another. I checked in with Judy and her parents. No one had heard from Jody. I thought about hiring a tracker, but my lawyer advised against it. I canceled the credit cards and took half the money. The records showed she hadn't used any of the remaining funds. If she stays gone long enough, we could file for desertion, but we'll see. Then the phone rang. Trey Taylor, I answered. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. It's Michael Hamilton. Do you remember me? Of course, Michael. How's everything going? I replied, sitting up in the chair. Not bad, he said. I just wanted to update you on my situation. Remember my divorce? Yeah, I said. Your ex was living with her boyfriend. That's right, Michael confirmed. Turns out the guy's a thief. He convinced my ex to steal from her company, and now they're both in jail. I chuckled. Good for them. Are you still at the same place? Michael asked. Yeah, I replied. That's actually why I'm calling, he continued. Since your wife left, things have been quiet. Stan Morrison's been keeping to himself, but lately some of his calls have been interesting. Interesting how? I asked, intrigued. He was talking to your wife today. I frowned. How do you know? I overheard him say, I miss you too, Jody, Michael said. I sat up straighter. Did you hear where she is? I got her phone number after he talked to her, Michael explained. He left his phone on the desk, so I grabbed it and wrote it down. Nice work, Michael, I said, impressed. Thanks, he replied. Keep me posted if you hear anything else. I got the number, passed it to my attorney, and decided to make the call. The phone rang, and someone picked up. Hello? Hi, Judy. It's Trey. What do you need? She asked, her tone flat. Do you or anyone in your family know anyone in Florida? I asked. Why? She responded, cautious. Because I think Jody's there. Why do you care? Judy shot back. I want a divorce, and she needs to sign the papers, I explained. When are you going to ask her? Judy replied, sounding uninterested. I don't need to ask, I said. My lawyer is already handling it, but it would save him some trouble. She lives in Fort Lauderdale, Judy said almost reluctantly. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why didn't you say anything before? Over the next few days, Judy gave me Jody's address and confirmed that Jody knew the divorce papers were ready. I gave the address to my attorney, and he immediately sent them. Judy and I planned to have dinner and then watch the video at my house. She made it clear, though, that revenge wasn't on the table, and she wouldn't sleep with her brother-in-law. Thursday morning, Michael Hamilton called again. Hey, Mr. Taylor, just a quick update. Stan Morrison quit his job today. No notice, just packed up and left. He told someone he's moving to Florida. Interesting. Thanks, Michael, I said. By the way, how's everything with you? Michael asked. My wife confessed to the theft and pled guilty, I replied. She'll get a light sentence, but her boyfriend's looking at serious time. I laughed, and we chatted a little longer before I ended the call. I immediately dialed Judy's number. How long have you known Stan Morrison was moving to Florida? I asked when she picked up. There was a long silence on the other end. Judy, how long? I pressed. A few days, she finally answered. How many times have they seen each other since she moved in with him? I continued. 4. She's been here twice, and he's been there twice. 4 times? I couldn't believe it. You knew she was still seeing him, and you were okay with that, after everything? Trey, she's my sister, Judy said quietly. I ended the call. Moments later, Judy called again, but I ignored it. I sat in my cubicle for a while, then walked over to the repair shop to talk to the mechanics. One of them, a friend of mine, was a retired Army vet. He'd lost part of his leg and fingers in Iraq, and he was one of the few who understood what I was going through. We sat outside, and I brought him up to speed. I could make sure they don't make it to Florida, he said. No, I replied. Neither one is worth going to jail over. I just want to be rid of her. I can make that happen too, he offered. I laughed. Nah, living with myself is punishment enough. We talked for a while longer, until I heard over the loudspeaker, Trey, call line 4. Back at my cubicle, I picked up the phone. Trey Taylor. Trey, please don't hang up. I hung up, walked over to the receptionist and said, no more calls today. I'm going home. When I turned onto my street, I saw Judy's car parked in front of my house. I pulled into the driveway, and by the time I reached the garage, she was already at the front door knocking. She remembered my threat about the doorbell, so I entered through the garage and made my way to the kitchen. She kept knocking, so I decided to answer. You're not welcome here, I said as I opened the door. Listen, she started. I shut the door in her face, this time without slamming it. I heated up some spaghetti and meatballs, then went to my bedroom where I fell asleep by 10 p.m. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I saw Judy waiting for me. She probably thought I wouldn't cause a scene at work. She was wrong. As I tried to pass her, she grabbed my arm. "Damn it, Trey, listen." I pulled my arm away. "You don't have anything I want to hear. You let her come back to me while she was sleeping with that fool over and over, and you didn't tell me? All three of you can rot in hell." It was a while before I saw Judy again, but she stayed in touch with my mom. By then, the whole dealership knew what was going on, making for a long day. I stuck around the dealership trying to figure out my next move, then headed home. Later, my mom called and invited me over for dinner. I went, and she made Italian food. We ate, but the evening took a turn when she said, "I talked to Judy today." "Mom, if you bring up this family again, I'm leaving," I warned her. "Trey, listen. There's something you don't know," she said, her tone serious. "I know everything I need to know." "Jody cheated and I'm divorcing her," I replied, trying to keep my anger in check. "Good, but what about the baby?" she asked, her voice softer. "What?" I shot up from the table, stunned. "I talked to her. She's pregnant," Mom explained. "You didn't tell me." My voice cracked with disbelief. "She asked us not to," Mom said. "So you listened to her and ignored your own son," I shot back, hurt and frustrated. "We thought you might need more time to forgive her," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "Forgive her? Have you lost your mind? Do you remember what it was like living with a cheater?" I couldn't hold back the anger anymore. "Honey, things are different now. People are freer to try new things," she said, trying to explain. I stormed out. Was I living in an alternate universe? My mom had been through hell with my dad's cheating, and now she was telling me cheating was okay for my wife. I loved her, but her naivety was astounding. It was like she'd buy an encyclopedia from a traveling salesman in the age of smartphones. I drove past my house and ended up at a car dealership. I had my keys with me, so I went inside, found the employee lounge, and laid down on the couch. I tossed and turned until nearly 5 a.m. before falling asleep. I woke up at 10:30, and my boss found me and put up a sign asking people not to disturb me. When I finally got moving, one of the salesmen told me that the boss wanted to see me. I wasn't feeling great, my back ached from the couch, and I desperately needed a shower, but I made my way to his office. "Trey," he said, looking up from his desk, "you need some time off, and I can make that happen. You remember the Jacobsons? The couple you sold the blue Prevost to?" "Yes," I replied. "Well, last week, Mr. Jacobson had a heart attack in Vancouver. He's okay now, but they need someone to bring the carriage home, and they've asked for you." "Sounds perfect," I said. "When can I leave?" "Tomorrow," he answered. "Janie will book your flight. Use the company credit card for expenses." "Great. I'll get packed," I said, feeling relieved. "How long should I take?" "Take 4 days for the trip back," he instructed. "But take 10. The Jacobsons aren't in a rush, and we don't need you back too soon. Hand over your deals to Ben, and he'll handle them." When I got to Vancouver, I went straight to the hospital. Mr. Jacobson had a lot of tubes and machines hooked up, and Mrs. Jacobson was fussing over him, trying to make him comfortable while he grumbled. It was clear they just wanted to be near each other, and it made me smile. "Mrs. Jacobson, it's good to see you," I said. "Hi, Trey. How was the flight?" "I picked up Mr. Jacobson," I said. "Now be quiet, Robert." "You heard what the doctor said," Mrs. Jacobson teased. "I can tell him to be quiet now, and he can't argue. Doctor's orders." She winked at me. We sat, talking while Robert drifted in and out of sleep. Every time we thought he was out, a nurse would come in to check his vitals or adjust his meds. Mrs. Jacobson told me the motorhome was parked nearby and that their grandchildren had been with them. Her grandson had flown home, but their granddaughter was packing to return with me once Robert was discharged. Just as we finished talking, the granddaughter walked in, carrying 2 suitcases for her grandparents. She was about my age, attractive, and clearly uninterested in me. After a brief exchange with her grandmother, Mrs. Jacobson turned to me. "Darla has been driving our car for the last week. She'll take you to the bus to get it ready," she said, but Darla didn't seem thrilled. "Darla, stop it. You'll be fine," Mrs. Jacobson added. "She doesn't want to go back with you, Trey. She thinks she should stay with us. By the way," Mrs. Jacobson continued, "your boss said you might need a few extra days and suggested traveling through Yellowstone. We promised Darla we'd do that on the way home." "I'll see what I can do," I replied. As we were leaving, she handed me a letter authorizing me to take the bus across the border and kissed me on the cheek. "Thanks for helping. Be careful." Darla and I drove to the RV park. She kept quiet, grunting and ignoring me. I tried to make conversation, but she wasn't having it. When we reached the bus, she went inside, taking the car keys with her. I asked her for the keys, but she tossed them at me, and I barely dodged them. "What's your problem?" I muttered as I picked them up. Fed up, I hooked the car up to the bus. After a short break, I considered grabbing a cold beer, so I went inside to see if the Jacobsons had any. "No beer?" I asked. "I'm not your maid," I shot back when Darla closed the fridge and stormed off. That was it. I was done with all the women in my life, Jody, Judy, my mom, and now Darla. Mrs. Jacobson was the only one still remotely civil, but even that was wearing thin. I disconnected the power and water, got in the driver's seat, and started the engine. By 8 p.m., I'd crossed into the U.S. and cleared customs. Darla had to step outside for the border check before returning to the bedroom. I was ready to get this trip over with. By 7 a.m. the next day, we were in Burley, Idaho. I'd stopped a few times overnight for coffee and sandwiches, but I was tired and irritable. Darla sat in silence next to me for a while before finally speaking. "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" I snapped, remembering how she'd treated me the night before. "I'm not your damn maid," I said, pressing the gas pedal harder. She glared at me and stormed off to the bedroom. By 9 a.m., I needed to stop at a rest area. When I came back from the bathroom, she was getting off the bus. "If you get off, you can't get back on," I said, starting the engine. By noon, I was sore from driving, so I pulled into a parking lot between two trucks and collapsed on the couch. I passed out almost instantly. I woke up to the hum of the Cummins diesel engine and realized we were moving. Checking the time, I saw I'd been asleep for 5 hours. Darla was at the wheel, driving fast. After watching her for a bit, I figured she knew what she was doing. Her grandfather had obviously taught her well. I made some coffee and sat in the passenger seat. We drove in silence for 2 hours, but I started to get worried about the fuel. We'd been driving for about 25 hours, averaging 60 miles per hour, and had covered around 1,500 miles. At 8 mpg, we were almost out of fuel. "Hey, we should stop for gas," I said, but she didn't respond. I tried again. "We need fuel." Still nothing. Finally, she snapped, "I took care of it while you were snoring." Surprised, I went back to the couch and fell asleep again. I never saw her eat, drink, or use the bathroom during the trip, but she managed everything while I slept. After another 3 hours, we stopped at a truck stop in Dumas, Texas. It was past 10 p.m. I made sandwiches, grabbed coffee, and took the wheel, heading for Houston. I drove through the night, only stopping once for a bathroom break and some snacks. By 8 a.m., I pulled into the dealership in Houston. I needed a break, so I went downstairs to the restroom. It had been less than 40 hours since we'd gone through customs, but it felt like days. As I came out of the restroom, I saw the Jacobsons' car pulling out. The window was down, and I got an unsavory gesture from Darla. I returned it, then made myself coffee in the break room before crashing on the couch. I didn't stir until 3 p.m. When I woke up, I found a note from my boss saying he wanted to see me. I headed to his office and knocked. "You're monopolizing the break room," he said, half joking. "I got a call from Mrs. Jacobson. She wanted to know how you survived driving with her granddaughter." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. Apparently, Darla was a pain the entire trip. The Jacobsons didn't want her with them, and the grandson left because he couldn't handle her anymore. "Mrs. Jacobson was impressed you didn't strangle her," I smirked. "I wanted to, believe me." He laughed. "Anyway, they're glad you made it back safely. Mr. Jacobson will be discharged soon, and they want us to service the bus. They're even talking about buying it." "That's great," I said. "I thought they might sell it." He shook his head. "Not a chance. Now go home and get some rest. The break room needs a break from you." After just 3 days, it felt like I'd been gone longer. I showered, shaved, and slept for almost 30 hours. When I finally checked my phone, I realized I hadn't even thought about it. I dug through my clothes from the trip, looking for it, but my phone wasn't there. I called my boss. "Hey, can you check the break room and the coach for my phone? I think I left it somewhere." He called back a few minutes later, confirming no luck. Damn, I muttered to myself. How many customer calls did I miss? I went to the dealership and caught up with a few client messages by noon. I was heading back to my cubicle after grabbing coffee when I saw Darla walk into the break room. I quickly ducked into the staff area and waited. After about 10 minutes, the loudspeaker called my name. I took my time sipping my coffee before heading to my boss's office. He greeted me and mentioned Darla Jacobson was there to return my cell phone, which I'd left in her grandparents' car. As he was talking, his phone rang, and he stepped away to take the call. I nodded at Darla and followed her into the showroom. She held out my phone, but I kept my distance, not reaching for it right away. After a few steps, she placed it on a nearby table. "Am I really that bad?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. She left without saying another word. Back at my desk, I was processing everything when a loud crash from outside caught my attention. I saw a wreck involving 2 cars, and when I got to the scene, it was Darla. She'd been injured, but wasn't in immediate danger. As medics worked on her, she looked up and smiled. "You always catch me at my best," she said before passing out. The EMTs took her to the hospital. I called the Jacobsons to update them, assuring them Darla was okay. Then I heard Mr. Jacobson's cold response. "A broken arm. Too bad it wasn't her neck." After that, Mrs. Jacobson asked me to call Darla's parents, which I did. Later, I noticed 54 messages on my phone, mostly from my mother, Judy, clients, and one from Michael Hamilton. I set up appointments with the clients and ignored the rest. I left work at 5 p.m., heading home, but detouring to the hospital. At the information desk, I found Darla's room, where her parents were already visiting. Her mom introduced me to Ralph and Joanna Jacobson. They were friendly, but Darla's dad joked about how she'd talked non-stop about our trip. "Darla won't stop talking about it," her mom said. "I bet," I thought, recalling how unbearable she could be. After a brief conversation, I said my goodbyes, but Darla's dad stopped me to thank me for calling them. I nodded and left, feeling out of place. Back home, I debated calling my mother, but decided against it. That decision lasted for weeks, during which both my mother and Judy tried calling, but I ignored them. Even my stepfather reached out, and while I spoke with him, I cut the conversation short when he tried to pass the phone to my mother. I received the divorce papers from my attorney, sent to the address Judy had given me. Her signature was bold and written in red marker, and there was no mention of her pregnancy. If it was real, in 2 months, I'd be free. I was starting to think about staying single, which also made me think about my current celibacy. Damn it. I hadn't been with anyone in so long that I barely sat down before heading to the bathroom to shower and get ready for dinner. Just as I finished getting dressed, the phone rang. "Hello?" I answered. "Hi, Trey. It's Dottie Jacobson," came the voice on the other end. "Hi, Mrs. Jacobson. How's Robert doing?" I asked. "Call me Dottie," she replied warmly. "He's doing great. He's even planning our next trip to Colorado. I'm a little nervous about how he'll handle the mountains, though." "Don't worry, Dottie. His trainer will make sure he's safe. As long as he doesn't try to speed, he'll be fine." "That's what he says. He's been reading all about mountain driving." I chuckled. "Well, I might need some Valium before we go." She laughed, and I could hear the warmth in her voice. I liked Robert and Dottie. They were a good couple. "Anyway," she continued, "we're having a barbecue this Friday at 6 o'clock to celebrate Robert's recovery. Bring your wife. We'd love to meet her." I froze for a moment, realizing I'd never mentioned my personal life to them. Darla probably hadn't either. They didn't know I was almost divorced. "Thanks, Dottie," I said, regaining my composure. "I'd love to come." And with that, I ended the call. It was a great week at work. I sold 3 vans, one of which had been a high-end bus owned by a country star. My commission was excellent. I arrived at the Jacobson estate on Friday at 6 p.m. The house was impressive, and the garage housed their boat, which I'd driven over from Vancouver. A valet parked my car, which felt strange, but I went with it. Inside, there were about 50 guests. Dottie greeted me with a hug and asked where my wife was. "I'm in the process of getting a divorce," I told her. She pulled me back and said, "Your wife is an idiot." Then she put her arm around me, leading me to the crowd. When she mentioned introducing me to some nice young ladies, I knew I didn't belong. I decided to stay only briefly. While finishing my brisket and beer, I spotted Darla running away from a guy. I didn't expect her to be here, but I should have. She grabbed my hand before I could slip away. "Come on, Trey," she said, pulling me into the house and toward the library. Yes, the library. Once inside, she looked at me, clearly upset. "This guy's an a-hole. I have a behavior problem and need help." I started to walk out. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "I'm leaving," I replied, heading toward the door. "Before you kick me out?" she asked, almost pleading. "Because I agree with him," I said, turning back slightly. "He shouldn't have said that in front of everyone. Someone had to say it." "Damn it, Trey, you're supposed to be on my side," she shot back, frustration in her voice. "Why? The only nice thing you ever said to me was while you were lying in the street, bleeding," I retorted, my words sharp. She slumped onto a chair, and I stood still, not looking at her. "How's the arm?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "It itches like hell. she muttered. I have to use this thing to scratch. She pulled out a tool from her cast that looked like a back scratcher. I've got to go, I said, heading for the door. Trey? She called after me. Yeah? I turned back slightly. If I promise to behave, will you have dinner with me? She asked softly. I paused before replying. Darla, I'm going through a divorce. I don't need the extra stress, and I'm likely to do something that'll make things worse. So no, dinner's not a good idea. Saturday morning, I packed up and left. My mom showed up at my door later that day, and I let her in. I've been thinking it over, and I agree with you, she said. There are things we can compromise on, but faithfulness in marriage isn't one of them. You reminded me of the pain with your father, and no one should go through that. I'm sorry for pushing you to get back with Judy. I was selfish, only thinking about the baby and the idea of being a grandmother. Please forgive me. I forgave her, and we hugged. We chatted for another hour before she left. Monday mid-morning, my phone rang. Trey Taylor, I answered. Good morning, Trey. It's Michael Hamilton. I have news. What's the news? I asked. Stan Morrison called to ask for his job back, and they said no, Michael replied. I laughed. Just thought you might want to know. Thanks, Michael, I said, hanging up. Now I was on a first-name basis with him. Around noon, the Jacobsons' carriage pulled into the yard. I was with customers, so I couldn't greet them right away. 30 minutes later, after walking my clients to their car, I made my way to the bus. Darla opened the door. Hi, come on in, she said. I stepped inside and turned left, avoiding the driver's seat. Once seated, I noticed the smell of lasagna from the kitchen. Darla handed me a glass of wine. Clink, she said, holding up her glass. We both took a sip. It was a great Chianti. I thought I'd offer lunch instead of dinner. Also, I figured it'd be better to talk privately instead of embarrassing or pissing you off in public, she said. I asked my grandparents if I could use the bus, and when I explained why, they agreed. They just made me promise not to drive off if I got mad. You said when, not if, she said with a smile. He knows you well. I expected an argument, but Darla stayed calm, took another sip of wine, and turned to fill her glass. I hope you're hungry. I made lasagna this morning. It's really good, if I do say so myself, she said, moving around the kitchen despite her cast. The doorbell rang. Bring it in, please, she called. I went to open the door, and my boss stood there. I waved it off awkwardly. It's okay, I said, closing the door and returning to my seat. Darla seemed at ease. She moved naturally around the small kitchen, clearly comfortable. I smiled, but I knew one of us would probably do something to annoy the other eventually. She asked me to sit at the dining table, and I did. The bus was tight on space, but the living area expanded with sliding drawers. We ate, chatted, and finished a bottle of Chianti. Neither of us had gotten on each other's nerves yet. After a couple of hours, I decided to head back to work. Thanks, Darla. It was a nice surprise, and the food was great. My pleasure, she said, walking me to the door. As I stepped down, she leaned in and kissed me gently. We both paused, shocked. Is dinner still off the table? She asked, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. How about tonight? Let's say 7 o'clock. She gave me her address, and I started to leave, but we kissed again. It took me another 10 minutes to finally leave. I stepped off the bus and saw 6 faces, including my boss, watching me through the exhibit hall window. As soon as they realized I saw them, they scattered, except for my boss, who opened the door for me. Well, I'm off to get ready for my date tonight, I said, laughing. 10 minutes later, Darla drove the bus out of the parking lot. As we headed to her house, my phone rang. Trey Taylor. So you managed not to eliminate each other, huh? Dottie's voice came through. Hey, Dottie. I think Robert's listening. We want to hear your side, Robert said. I'm a gentleman. I don't kiss and tell. I laughed. Horse crap, Robert interrupted. Watch your language, Robert, Dottie scolded. Trey, she continued. When Darla asked to borrow the coach, she was nervous, but finally confessed it was to make you lasagna. I had no idea she could cook. She blushed when she said it. She made you lasagna? I asked. Yep, she just knows, Darla had replied, blushing. Trey, Dottie said. She's tough on the outside, but she's a good girl at heart. She's been hurt a lot and uses that attitude as armor. Just don't hurt her, okay? Understood, I said, though I thought Robert was overreacting. I'm just saying, treat her right, Robert warned. Don't worry, I replied. Before I could hang up, my phone rang again. Trey, it's Judy, came the voice on the other end. The anger hit me instantly, but I forced myself to stay calm. What's up, Judy? I just wanted you to know, she began, her voice tight. Jody kicked Stan out, but he came back today and battered her up. She's in the hospital, Trey. Her nose is broken. She's in ICU and Stan's in jail. My heart sank. What about the baby? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. She lied about it, Judy replied, her tone flat. It's gone, and honestly, I'm done with her, Trey. She's still my wife until the divorce is final, I said. She stopped being your wife the day she signed those papers, Judy retorted. Goodbye. When we reached Darla's gated community, the guard acted surprised when I told him I was visiting her. He laughed as he called her to check, then wished me luck as he opened the gate. At dinner, I learned Darla liked steak and potatoes, medium rare ribeye with blue cheese and baked potatoes. I was impressed by how she handled cutting the steak with her arm in a cast. She ate half, then switched to her drink, and the waiter offered to pack the leftovers. I joked, I didn't know you had doggy bags here. The waiter grinned. First time for everything. As we left, the same guard was at the gate, but this time his expression was less amused. I glanced at Darla and joked, I don't have many dates, and he's not used to me coming home in the same car I left in. Usually I take a cab. When we got to her house, she invited me inside. What would you like to drink? She asked. A gin and tonic, I replied. We sat in silence for a while, and then she made a move. I got the hint. We spent the night together. The next morning, I called my boss. I won't be in today, I said. Why not? He asked. I'm still on my date from last night, I replied. He laughed. The days following were unexpectedly quiet, as though the storm that had consumed my life had finally passed. The finality of my decisions settled over me like a heavy but reassuring weight. I was done chasing answers and seeking closure from those who had broken my trust. I had moved on, not perfectly, not painlessly, but decisively. Darla and I continued to see each other. Her sharp edges softened with time, revealing a humor and depth that complemented her fiery nature. I discovered in her a shared resilience, a refusal to be defined by past mistakes. Our differences often led to spirited debates, but they became a source of growth rather than conflict. She challenged me in ways I didn't know I needed, and I found myself slowly, cautiously, allowing hope to bloom again. Jody's presence in my life faded like the final echoes of a distant storm. I received updates through Judy, but they felt more like distant news than personal revelations. I no longer felt anger, only a strange, muted gratitude for the lessons learned and the paths that led me here. My work at the dealership thrived. The Jacobsons became regulars, their enthusiasm for life a constant reminder of what a true partnership looked like. They often invited me and Darla for dinners, their support unwavering as they encouraged our relationship. It was at one such dinner that Dottie leaned over and whispered, "You've been through enough, Trey. Let yourself be happy." I still thought of my mother, of her misguided attempts to smooth over my life's jagged edges. Our relationship had improved, though her mention of Jody or the past still caused tension. But I'd learned to set boundaries, to choose the people and stories I allowed into my life. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself on the Jacobsons' coach, parked outside Darla's home. She'd invited me over for lasagna, and as I stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar scent of garlic and herbs. She smiled at me, her cast finally removed, and raised a glass of Chianti. "To new beginnings," she said softly. I clinked my glass against hers, the weight of the past lifting slightly with each sip. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years I wasn't afraid to find out.